The rejection had happened 3 nights ago, but Serafina Morgan still felt like she was drowning in the aftermath. The physical pain clawed at her chest where the mate bond had tried to form and been violently severed. She stood at the edge of Ironwood territory as the first rays of dawn painted the forest in hues of amber and gold. Behind her lay everything she had ever known. Before her stretched the vast unknown. The forest was silent, save for the whisper of pines in the early morning breeze. Serafina closed her eyes, allowing the wind to dry the tears that had fallen unbidden. She was 25 years old, an Omega with the gift of healing, and 3 nights ago, she had been publicly rejected by the man she believed was her destined mate. The ceremony had been witnessed by the entire Ironwood pack. Hundreds of eyes watched as Griffin Steele, son of the pack's beta, stood before her in the sacred circle. The full moon had bathed them in silver light as the pack elder recited the ancient words of bonding. When the time came for Griffin to accept the bond, he had looked at her with cold eyes that betrayed no emotion. "I, Griffin Steele, reject you, Serafina Morgan, as my mate." The words had fallen like stones into still water, sending ripples of shock through the assembled pack. Some gasped, others whispered behind their hands. A few, those aligned with the Steele family, had actually smiled. But it was the physical pain that followed which nearly brought Serafina to her knees. The rejection of a mate bond felt like molten lead being poured into her veins, burning away what should have been sacred. She understood why he had done it. Serafina was nobody, an Omega from a family with no political connections, no special status. She had nothing to offer an ambitious alpha like Griffin except genuine love and loyalty. But in the world of pack politics, love held little value compared to power and alliance. So she had done the only thing she could. Packed what little she owned into a small, leather backpack, left a note for the elderly Omega who had raised her after her parents' death, and walked away from Ironwood territory before dawn broke the next day. Staying would only prolong the agony for everyone involved, especially for her. Better to disappear and let Griffin find the politically advantageous mate he clearly wanted. Now, as she crossed the border that marked the end of Ironwood land, Serafina pulled from her pocket the only item of value she possessed, a silver medallion that had belonged to her mother. The pendant was unusual, circular with intricate engravings of a wolf howling beneath a crescent moon. Around the edge ran symbols in a language Serafina did not understand. Her mother had told her it was a family heirloom, passed down through generations. It was the only connection Serafina had to her past. For 3 days, Serafina had been wandering the neutral territories between packlands, trying to determine where a rejected Omega with nothing to her name was supposed to go. Most packs wouldn't accept a wolf in her position. The stigma was too strong. If your own mate didn't want you, the thinking went, something must be fundamentally wrong with you. The forest gradually thinned as Serafina climbed higher into the mountains. Few wolves ventured this far into the wilderness. These were the ancient lands, places of legend where the first packs had once roamed. Stories told of sacred sites and old magic that lingered in the stones and streams. Serafina had always dismissed such tales as nursery stories told to pups. But now, alone in the vastness, she found herself hoping for some kind of magic to guide her path. As the sun climbed higher, dark clouds gathered on the horizon. The wind shifted, carrying the unmistakable scent of approaching snow. Serafina quickened her pace, searching for suitable shelter. A storm in these mountains could be deadly, especially for a lone wolf. By mid-afternoon, the first snowflakes began to fall, large and wet, quickly coating the ground in white. The temperature dropped rapidly. Serafina pulled her worn coat tighter around her body and pressed forward, scanning the rocky terrain for any sign of shelter. It was near dusk when she spotted it, a dark opening in the mountainside, partially hidden behind a stand of ancient pines. A cave. Relief flooded through her as she made her way toward it, the snow now falling heavily, obscuring visibility beyond a few yards. The cave entrance was larger than it had appeared from a distance, easily tall enough for her to enter without stooping. Serafina paused at the threshold, inhaling deeply to check for the scent of predators or other wolves. The air carried only the smell of stone and earth, with undertones of something old and vaguely metallic. No recent animal presence. It would be safe enough. Inside, the cave extended deeper than expected. Serafina ventured forward cautiously, her wolf eyes adjusting quickly to the darkness. The passage widened into a large chamber with a high ceiling. What caught her attention immediately were the walls. They were covered in ancient paintings, wolves running beneath moons of different phases, human figures with spears and symbols similar to those on her medallion. Serafina traced one of the symbols with her fingertips, a shiver running down her spine that had nothing to do with the cold. This was no ordinary cave. It was old, sacred perhaps, a place where the ancients had come to worship or record their history. Using the meager supplies from her pack, Serafina built a small fire near the cave entrance, careful to position it where the smoke could escape. The dancing flames cast eerie shadows across the painted walls, bringing the ancient scenes to life. Wolves seemed to run in endless circles around the chamber. Hunters pursued prey through forests that no longer existed, and always watching over everything, the moon in its various phases. As the storm intensified outside, howling winds driving snow into drifts, Serafina huddled close to her fire. She chewed on the last of her dried meat and tried not to think about the uncertain future that awaited her once the storm passed. She had no destination, no plan beyond basic survival. Exhaustion eventually overcame her, and Serafina drifted into an uneasy sleep, curled beside the dying embers of her fire. Her dreams were chaotic, fragments of the rejection ceremony mixed with images from the cave paintings and strange voices speaking in languages she did not understand. She was awakened suddenly by a sound that made every hair on her body stand on end. It was a howl, but unlike any she had heard before. It was weak and pained, barely audible over the storm, and it was coming from somewhere deep within the cave. Every instinct told Serafina to stay put, to ignore it. She had her own survival to worry about, and investigating strange noises in an unknown cave could be dangerous. But the sound came again, weaker this time, and despite everything she had been through, despite the rejection that had nearly broken her, Serafina found herself unable to ignore a creature in pain. She rekindled her fire, fashioned a crude torch from a branch, and moved deeper into the cave, following the sound. The passage beyond the painted chamber narrowed and descended. The air grew colder, but oddly more vibrant somehow, as if charged with energy. The walls here were no longer painted, but carved with intricate patterns that seemed to shimmer in the torchlight. The medallion at Serafina's throat grew warm against her skin. The passage eventually opened into another chamber, smaller than the first, but with a ceiling so high that her torchlight couldn't reach it. In the center of this chamber was what appeared to be an ancient altar stone, and beyond it, a dark archway leading to yet another room. The pained howl came again, clearer now, emanating from beyond that archway. Heart pounding, Serafina stepped through the archway and raised her torch. The sight before her caused her breath to catch in her throat. The chamber was circular, its walls lined with stone columns carved to resemble howling wolves. In the center, collapsed on a dais of pale stone, lay the largest wolf Serafina had ever seen. Even in its weakened state, the creature was magnificent. Its fur was midnight black with streaks of silver, like stars scattered across the night sky. But that beautiful coat was matted with blood from multiple deep wounds across its massive body. The wolf's sides heaved with labored breathing, and its eyes were closed in pain. As Serafina approached cautiously, those eyes snapped open, fixing on her with an intensity that froze her in place. They were an unusual color, deep amber rimmed with gold, intelligent and fierce despite the obvious agony. The wolf made no move to rise or attack, merely watched her with those extraordinary eyes. The creature radiated power unlike anything Serafina had encountered. Even wounded and near death, the energy emanating from the wolf made her omega nature want to submit instinctively. This was no ordinary wolf. This was an alpha of exceptional strength, perhaps the strongest she had ever encountered. "What happened to you?" Serafina whispered, slowly kneeling beside the massive wolf, her healing instincts overriding her fear. The wolf's eyes remained locked on her face, somehow communicating both warning and plea. As Serafina's gaze traveled over the wounds, her healer's training took over. The injuries were deliberate and systematic. Claw marks across the throat, deep puncture wounds in the chest, and most concerning, a wound on the wolf's side that had the distinctive pattern of a silver blade. These were not injuries from a hunting accident or territorial dispute. This was an assassination attempt. "I'm going to help you," she said softly, setting her torch in a crack in the stone floor. "I don't know who did this to you or why, but I won't let you die here." She reached out slowly, allowing the wolf to see her hand before gently touching its massive head. The moment her fingers made contact with the silken fur, something electric passed between them. The medallion at her throat flared with sudden heat, and images flashed through Seraphina's mind. A stone fortress on a mountaintop, warriors in ancient armor, a crown of silver set with amber stones. Gasping, Seraphine pulled her hand away, but the connection remained, a subtle thread of energy linking her to the injured wolf. The creature's eyes had widened at the contact, recognition flaring in those amber depths. Getting the massive wolf back to the outer chamber where her fire and supplies waited seemed impossible, but Seraphina knew she had to try. The wolf needed warmth and proper care if it was to survive. With gentle words of encouragement, she coaxed the creature to its feet. The effort clearly caused immense pain, but somehow the wolf managed to stand, leaning heavily against her as they made their slow way back through the passages. By the time they reached the painted chamber, both Seraphina and the wolf were exhausted and soaked with sweat despite the cold air. She helped the massive creature settle near her rekindled fire, then quickly set about examining the wounds more thoroughly in the better light. The injuries were worse than she had initially thought. The claw marks across the throat had narrowly missed the jugular. The puncture wounds in the chest were deep, and the silver blade wound was already showing signs of poisoning. The distinctive green-black discoloration that occurred when silver entered a werewolf's bloodstream. Seraphina used what little remained of her clean clothing to fashion bandages. She packed snow around the wounds to slow the bleeding, then began to sing softly as she worked, an old healing song her mother had taught her before she died. The melody was simple but haunting, the words in an ancient language that few remembered. As she sang, something unexpected happened. Her hands, pressed against the wolf's wounds, began to emit a subtle glow, pale gold like early morning sunlight. The wolf's eyes widened, fixed on her face with an expression almost human in its surprise. Seraphina was equally shocked, but instinctively continued the song, watching in amazement as the bleeding slowed beneath her glowing hands. "I don't understand what's happening," she whispered when the song ended, the glow fading from her fingers. "I've always had some healing ability, but nothing like this." The wolf made a soft rumbling sound in response, its intelligent eyes never leaving her face. Through the night, Seraphina continued to tend the wolf's wounds, cleaning away blood and applying fresh snow to reduce swelling. She talked as she worked, the sound of her voice seeming to soothe the injured creature. "I was rejected," she admitted quietly during the deepest hours of the night, her hands gentle as she checked the bandages. 3 days ago, in front of my entire pack, the alpha I thought was my mate told everyone he didn't want me. And the worst part is, I can't even blame him. I'm nobody special, just an omega with nothing to offer." The wolf made a low sound that might have been disagreement, and Seraphina felt tears prick at her eyes. "You're sweet to pretend that's not true," she said with a sad smile. "But we both know how the world works. Status matters, power matters, and love." She laughed bitterly. "Love doesn't matter at all when measured against political advantage." She worked through the night, checking the wolf's wounds regularly and keeping the fire burning despite her dwindling supply of wood. Several times she thought she was losing him, his breathing becoming shallow and his body going still. But each time she would talk to him urgently, beg him to hold on, and somehow he would rally. As false dawn began to lighten the sky outside the cave entrance, Seraphina found herself wondering about the strange wolf's identity. He was clearly no ordinary alpha. His size, the power he radiated even in his weakened state, the distinctive silver streaking his black coat, all marked him as someone significant. And the images she had seen when they first touched, the fortress, the warriors, the crown, suggested royalty of some kind. "Who are you?" she whispered, more to herself than to the wolf. "And why would someone want to kill you?" The wolf's eyes opened again, fixing on her face with that same intense stare that seemed to see through to her soul. Something shifted in Seraphina's chest as they looked at each other. A subtle sensation, barely noticeable, but it felt like a tiny crack in the wall of pain that had been surrounding her heart since the rejection. As true sunrise approached, the blizzard finally began to ease. Seraphina, exhausted from her night of desperate healing, dozed against the cave wall. She was awakened by sounds from outside, not the wind or snow this time, but voices, many voices coming from multiple directions. Fully alert now, Seraphina moved cautiously to the cave entrance and felt her blood run cold at what she saw. There were wolves everywhere, dozens of them in both human and animal forms, searching through the snow-covered landscape with obvious urgency. And they were all heading in her direction, drawn perhaps by the smoke from her fire or by some scent they were tracking. Fear flooded through her, one lone Omega against what appeared to be a small army. The odds were not in her favor. She retreated into the cave, mind racing. There was nowhere to run. The only exit was the cave mouth, now being approached by the search party. She could try to hide deeper in the cave, but they would surely find her. The massive black wolf had risen to his feet despite his injuries, standing protectively in front of Seraphina, his hackles raised. Despite his wounded state, he was positioning himself between her and the approaching threat. The first of the searchers appeared at the cave entrance, a tall man with iron-gray hair and the bearing of a veteran warrior. He wore leather armor of an unusual design, tooled with the same symbols that adorned Seraphina's medallion. His eyes widened at the sight of the massive black wolf standing protectively before a young woman. "Stand down," he called over his shoulder to those behind him. "I've found him, and he's not alone." More figures appeared at the cave entrance, all wearing similar armor. Their expressions ranged from relief to shock to suspicion as they took in the scene before them, their wounded quarry and the strange woman he was protecting. The gray-haired man approached slowly, hands raised to show he meant no harm. His focus was entirely on the massive black wolf. "My king," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "We've been searching for 3 days. When you didn't return from the hunt, when we found the signs of ambush." He trailed off, his gaze shifting to Seraphina. "Who is this woman? What happened?" "King?" Seraphina's mind reeled. The wolf she had spent the night healing was royalty? The black wolf growled low in his throat, positioning himself more firmly between Seraphina and the newcomers. "He's protecting her," one of the other warriors observed, his tone surprised. "After what happened with the Ironwood delegation, I wouldn't have expected him to trust any stranger, especially not now." The gray-haired man studied Seraphina more carefully, his gaze eventually falling on the medallion at her throat. His expression changed from suspicion to shock. "Where did you get that medallion, girl?" he demanded, his hand moving to the hilt of his sword. Instinctively, Seraphina's fingers closed around the silver pendant. "It was my mother's," she answered, trying to keep her voice steady despite her fear. "A family heirloom." "Your mother's name?" "Elena Morgan. She died when I was a child." The name clearly meant something to the man. He exchanged significant glances with his companions before turning back to Seraphina. "Elena Morgan was a royal guard," he said slowly, "one of the king's most trusted protectors. She disappeared 20 years ago during the territory wars." His eyes narrowed. "If you're her daughter, prove it. Show me the birthmark." Seraphina stared at him in shock. Her mother? A royal guard? It seemed impossible. Elena Morgan had been a healer in the Ironwood Pack, a quiet Omega who kept to herself and raised her daughter with stories and songs. But the man was waiting, his hand still on his sword hilt. Seraphina pushed up her sleeve, revealing a birthmark on the inside of her left wrist. A crescent moon shape, small but distinct. The gray-haired warrior exhaled sharply. "By the moon goddess," he murmured. "Elena's daughter." He removed his hand from his sword and bowed his head slightly. "I am Commander Magnus Drake, head of the King's Guard. The wolf you have been caring for is Alexander Blackthorn, King of the United Packs, ruler of the 7 territories." Seraphina felt lightheaded. The most powerful alpha in the known world had been lying wounded in her care all night, and she had been telling him her sad tale of rejection. "He was ambushed during a hunt 3 days ago," Magnus continued. "We found signs of at least a dozen attackers, but no trail to follow. The blizzard covered any traces. We've been searching without rest since then." His gaze sharpened. "How did you find him? What were you doing in these mountains alone?" Before Seraphina could answer, movement from outside the cave drew everyone's attention. More warriors were arriving, but these were being engaged by the first group in what appeared to be a defensive formation. "Ambush!" came a shout from outside. "Protect the king!" The relative calm of the moment shattered. Magnus drew his sword, a gleaming blade inscribed with runes that seemed to shimmer with inner light. "Get him deeper into the cave," he ordered Seraphina. "Protect him at all costs." But the massive black wolf, King Alexander, had other ideas. Despite his injuries, he moved toward the cave entrance, a growl building in his chest. Magnus tried to block his path. "My king, you're injured. Let us handle this." Alexander snarled, baring impressive fangs, and pushed past his commander. Magnus cursed but followed, as did the other guards. Seraphina hesitated only a moment before grabbing her pack and following them to the cave entrance. Outside, chaos reigned. The storm had passed, leaving a landscape transformed by snow, now being disturbed by the violent clash of two forces. The king's guards, identifiable by their distinctive armor, were engaged with another group of warriors dressed in dark leathers with no identifying insignia. Alexander, despite his wounded state, had launched himself at the nearest attacker, his massive jaws closing around the man's throat before he could react. The king might be injured, but he was still a formidable fighter, his movements graceful and lethal even through obvious pain. Magnus and his men formed a protective circle around their king, their swords and claws making short work of the attackers. But there were many of them, and they fought with the desperation of those who knew failure meant death. Seraphina remained in the cave entrance, unsure what to do. She was no warrior, had never been trained in combat. Her gifts were for healing, not hurting. But as she watched, one of the attackers broke through the defensive line and charged directly toward her, clearly thinking she was an easier target. Pure instinct took over. Seraphina's hand closed around her medallion, and words she didn't recognize spilled from her lips, an invocation in the same ancient language as her healing song. The medallion grew hot in her hand, and a pulse of golden light erupted from it, striking the charging attacker square in the chest. He fell, unconscious or dead. Seraphina couldn't tell. She stared at the medallion in shock. What had just happened? What power was this? There was no time to consider it further. The battle raged on, and though the king's guards were clearly superior fighters, they were outnumbered. Alexander himself was beginning to falter, his earlier wounds taking their toll. As Seraphina watched in horror, one of the attackers managed to land a vicious blow to the king's side, precisely where the silver blade wound was located. Alexander stumbled, momentarily vulnerable. The attacker raised his weapon for a killing stroke. Without conscious thought, Seraphina found herself running toward them, the medallion clutched in her hand, that strange ancient language flowing from her lips again. Golden light blazed from the medallion, brighter than before, momentarily blinding everyone in the vicinity. When the light faded, the attacker lay motionless on the ground, and Seraphina stood over Alexander's fallen form, the medallion still glowing faintly in her hand. The remaining attackers, seeing their comrade fall to some unknown power, broke and ran, disappearing into the forest. Magnus and his men quickly secured the area, checking for any remaining threats before turning their attention to their fallen king. Alexander had shifted back to human form in his unconsciousness, a tall man with the same midnight black hair streaked with silver, his powerful body marked by the wounds Seraphina had been treating all night. Seraphina knelt beside him, her hands automatically moving to check his pulse. It was there, but weak and erratic. The new wound was bleeding profusely, and the silver poisoning from the original blade wound was spreading, visible as dark lines beneath his skin. He needs immediate medical attention, she told Magnus, her healer's training taking precedence over the shock and confusion of the past few minutes. The silver poisoning is spreading, and he's lost too much blood. Magnus nodded grimly. Our fortress is a half-day's journey from here. Can you stabilize him enough for transport? I'll try, Seraphina answered, already pressing her hands to Alexander's wounds. As before, they began to emit that subtle golden glow as she sang the ancient healing song. The bleeding slowed, and some of the tension left Alexander's face, though he remained unconscious. What is that power? Magnus asked, watching in fascination. I've never seen healing magic like this. I don't know, Seraphina admitted. It started last night when I was treating his wounds. I've always had some small healing ability, but nothing like this. Magnus's gaze moved to the medallion still hanging around her neck, now dormant again. The royal medallion, he said softly. It's said to amplify the natural gifts of those of the bloodline. He looked at Seraphina with new respect. Elena never told you, did she, about your heritage? Seraphina shook her head, confused. What heritage? My mother was a healer in the Ironwood Pack. We lived quietly. There was never any talk of royal guards or medallions with power. She was protecting you, Magnus said. After the attempt on the previous king's life, Alexander's father, all royal guards and their families became targets. Elena disappeared with you during the chaos of the territory wars. We all assumed you both had been killed. His expression softened slightly. She was more than a royal guard, you know. She was the king's cousin of the Blackthorn bloodline. Seraphina stared at him, unable to process what he was saying. Her mother related to royalty? Herself with Blackthorn blood? It seemed impossible. A groan from Alexander interrupted her thoughts. His eyes had opened, those unusual amber gold orbs, now set in a strikingly handsome human face. His gaze found Serafina immediately, recognition flaring. "You," he said, his voice deep and rough with pain. "The Omega who saved me." "Rest, my king," Magnus advised. "We're preparing to transport you back to Blackcrest Fortress. Your wounds are severe." Alexander's eyes never left Serafina's face. "She comes with us," he said, the command unmistakable despite his weakened state. "Of course, my king," Magnus agreed. "She's Elena Morgan's daughter. She belongs at Blackcrest." Alexander's expression showed surprise at this information, but he seemed too weak for further questions. His eyes closed again, but his hand found Serafina's, squeezing briefly before he slipped back into unconsciousness. The king's guards worked quickly, fashioning a stretcher from branches and cloaks. They wrapped Alexander in furs against the cold and secured him to the stretcher, 4 strong warriors assigned to carry him. Magnus approached Serafina as the preparations were completed. "We leave immediately," he said. "The journey will be difficult in the snow, but we must reach Blackcrest by nightfall. The king's wounds require proper treatment, and these mountains are not safe, as we've seen." He studied her for a moment. "You've been through much these past days. Are you strong enough for the journey?" Serafina nodded, gathering her meager possessions. "I'll manage." She hesitated, then added, "Commander Drake, there's something you should know. I was recently rejected as a mate by Griffin Steele of the Ironwood Pack. Some packs consider that a mark of unworthiness." Magnus's expression darkened. "Steele, son of Sebastian Steele, the Pack Beta?" "Yes." "Interesting timing," Magnus murmured, more to himself than to her. His gaze sharpened. "The Ironwood delegation was at Blackcrest 3 days ago, the day the king was ambushed. They departed suddenly, claiming urgent pack business." Serafina felt cold that had nothing to do with the snow. "You think they were involved in the attack on the king?" "I think," Magnus said carefully, "that the son of the Ironwood Beta rejecting a woman of Blackthorn blood, followed immediately by an attempt on the king's life, is a coincidence worth investigating." He gestured for her to follow him out of the cave. "Come, we've lingered too long already. Blackcrest awaits, and with it, many answers." As they emerged into the bright winter morning, Serafina took one last look at the cave that had sheltered her through the storm and changed her life forever. Yesterday, she had been a rejected Omega with no future and no hope. Today, she was apparently a descendant of the royal bloodline, possessor of unexpected power, and bound for the legendary Blackcrest Fortress with the wounded Alpha King who had protected her even in his vulnerable state. The hunting party moved out, the king's stretcher at the center of a protective formation of warriors. Serafina walked alongside, occasionally checking Alexander's condition. His wounds were stable for now, but the silver poisoning worried her. It was spreading slowly but steadily, visible as dark lines beneath his skin. As they crested a ridge several hours into their journey, Serafina caught her first glimpse of their destination in the distance. Blackcrest Fortress rose from the highest peak of the mountain range, ancient stone walls gleaming in the winter sun. Even from this distance, the structure was awe-inspiring. Towers reaching skyward, massive walls encircling what appeared to be an entire small city within. "Blackcrest," Magnus said, noting her gaze. "Ancestral home of the Blackthorn Kings, built during the First Age when our kind still lived openly among humans. It has never fallen to siege or assault in 7 centuries." As Serafina stared at the fortress, one of the images that had flashed through her mind when she first touched Alexander returned. This same view, but with banners flying from the towers and smoke rising from hundreds of chimneys. It felt like a memory, but how could she remember a place she had never seen? "I've seen it before," she whispered, not realizing she had spoken aloud until Magnus turned to her with a raised eyebrow. "The blood remembers," he said cryptically. "Come, we still have hours of travel ahead, and the king grows weaker." The journey continued through the afternoon, the terrain growing steeper and more treacherous. Serafina was exhausted, running on nothing but determination and occasional sips from a water flask one of the guards had shared with her. But every time she felt her strength flagging, she would look at Alexander's pain-etched face on the stretcher and find the will to continue. Just as the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the snow-covered landscape, they reached the massive gates of Blackcrest Fortress. Word of their approach had clearly preceded them, for the gates swung open immediately, revealing a courtyard filled with warriors and servants all watching anxiously for their king's return. A murmur went through the crowd as they caught sight of Alexander's unconscious form on the stretcher. Then, almost as one, every eye turned to Seraphina, walking beside the king with her silver medallion gleaming at her throat. The whispers began immediately. Who is she? Why is she with the king? Is that the royal medallion? Magnus silenced the whispers with a raised hand. Prepare the healing chambers, he commanded. The king has been gravely wounded, and prepare guest quarters in the royal wing for Lady Morgan. Lady Morgan. The title felt foreign to Seraphina's ears, yet somehow not entirely wrong, as she followed the stretcher bearers into the fortress. She could feel the weight of dozens of stairs following her progress. Blackcrest's interior was even more impressive than its exterior. Soaring ceilings, ancient tapestries depicting battles and coronations, weapons and artifacts displayed in illuminated alcoves. But Seraphina had little time to admire the surroundings as they hurried through corridors and upstairs to reach the healing chambers. These chambers occupied the entire east wing of the fortress's upper level, a series of rooms filled with herbs, potions, and equipment for treating the wounded and ill. The head healer, an elderly woman with sharp eyes and quick movements, immediately took charge of Alexander's care, directing her assistants with the efficiency of long practice. Silver poisoning, she noted, examining the wound that most concerned Seraphina. Advanced stage, who treated him initially? I did, Seraphina answered. I found him in the cave last night. The healer's keen gaze assessed Seraphina. You slowed the spread. Not many could have managed that with basic supplies. You have the gift. She's Elena Morgan's daughter, Magnus informed the healer. Blood of the Blackthorn line. The old woman's eyes widened slightly. That explains much, she murmured, returning her attention to the king. The silver has nearly reached his heart. We must act quickly. Clear the room. Everyone but the girl. She pointed at Seraphina. Your blood might be the only thing strong enough to counteract the poison at this stage. The guards and assistants filed out, leaving only Seraphina, the head healer, and the unconscious king. The silver in his bloodstream will kill him by morning unless we remove it, the healer explained, gathering various herbs and crystals from around the room. Normally, we would need a full moon ritual with multiple healers, but we don't have time to wait for the moon. Your blood, Blackthorn blood, combined with your healing gift, might be strong enough. What do I need to do? Seraphina asked, pushing aside her exhaustion and confusion. Alexander had protected her even while grievously wounded. She would not fail him now. The ritual is ancient and dangerous, the healer warned. It creates a temporary blood bond between healer and patient. Your life forces will be connected for the duration. If he dies during the ritual, you may die as well. Are you willing to take that risk for a king you barely know? Seraphina looked down at Alexander's face, noble even in unconsciousness, remembered how he had positioned himself between her and danger despite his wounds, how his eyes had seemed to see into her very soul. Yes, she said simply, tell me what to do. The ritual preparation took nearly an hour. The healer arranged crystals in a specific pattern around Alexander's bed, burned herbs that filled the room with sweet-smelling smoke, and marked both Alexander's and Seraphina's foreheads with symbols drawn in a paste made from crushed leaves and what looked suspiciously like blood. The medallion, the healer said, pointing to Seraphina's throat, place it on his chest over his heart. Seraphina removed the silver pendant and laid it gently on Alexander's bare chest. The metal seemed to pulse slightly against his skin. Now, your blood must mix with his, the healer instructed, handing Seraphina a small ceremonial knife. Cut your palm and press it to his wound, the one made by the silver blade. Seraphina took a deep breath, then drew the knife across her palm, wincing at the sharp sting. Blood welled immediately. She placed her bleeding hand directly over the worst of Alexander's wounds, where the silver poisoning was most evident. The healer began to chant in the same ancient language Seraphina had used instinctively with the medallion. To her surprise, Seraphina found she could understand some of the words now, invocations to the moon goddess, pleas for healing and protection, references to blood bonds and ancient pacts. The medallion on Alexander's chest began to glow, pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat. Where Seraphina's blood met his wound, a similar glow emerged, golden light spreading beneath his skin, following the dark lines of poison, but transforming them as it moved, changing the sickly black-green to a healthy pink. Seraphina felt a sudden rush of sensation that nearly overwhelmed her. Pain that was not her own, memories she had never experienced, emotions foreign yet somehow familiar. Alexander's life was flowing into her through their connected blood, just as hers was flowing into him. The healer's chanting grew more intense, the rhythm faster, the words more urgent. The glow spread throughout Alexander's body, visible now as a network of light beneath his skin, mapping his veins and arteries. Serafina could feel her own strength draining as the ritual demanded more and more of her energy. Just as she thought she might collapse, the medallion flared with blinding intensity. Alexander's body arched off the bed, a gasp tearing from his throat. His eyes flew open, locking with Serafina's, and in that moment, she felt something snap into place between them, a connection deeper than words, more primal than thought. The healer's chanting stopped abruptly. The golden light faded, leaving the room in relative darkness, illuminated only by the standard lamps on the walls. Serafina swayed on her feet, suddenly dizzy with exhaustion. "It is done," the healer announced, her voice ragged with effort. "The poison is neutralized." She steadied Serafina with a surprisingly strong hand. "You should rest now. The ritual takes much from the healer." But Alexander was awake, his amber gold eyes clear for the first time since Serafina had found him. He reached out and caught her wrist before she could move away. "Wait," he said, his voice stronger than it had been in the cave. "I need to understand what happened." His gaze moved to the medallion still resting on his chest. "This medallion, your blood, the visions I saw during the ritual." "My king," the healer interrupted gently, "there will be time for questions later. Both you and the girl need rest to recover your strength." Alexander's eyes never left Serafina's face. "You saved my life," he said softly. "Twice now. First in the cave, then here. I won't forget that debt." "There is no debt," Serafina replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "You protected me from your own men when you didn't know who I was. You stood between me and danger despite your wounds." Something flickered in Alexander's gaze. Surprise, perhaps, or respect. "What is your name, your full name?" "Serafina Morgan," she answered, "though apparently my heritage is more complicated than I was raised to believe." "Serafina Morgan," he repeated as if testing the sound of it. "Daughter of Elena of the Blackthorn blood." A small smile touched his lips. "Welcome home to Blackcrest." Home. The word echoed in Serafina's mind as she was led from the healing chamber to the guest quarters that had been prepared for her. Home. After days of wandering, of feeling rejected and worthless, was it possible she had found where she truly belonged? The guest chamber was luxurious beyond anything Serafina had experienced. A large bed with fine linens, a fireplace already blazing with warmth, a private bathing room with hot water, and new clothes laid out for her use. A servant helped her bathe and dress, treating her with a deference that felt alien after a lifetime as a low-ranking Omega. The new clothing was finer than anything she had ever worn, soft leathers and woven fabrics in deep blues and silvers, the traditional colors of the Blackthorn house, she was told. When she was finally left alone, Serafina moved to the window of her chamber, looking out over the moonlit expanse of Blackcrest and the mountains beyond. Somewhere out there was the Ironwood territory, where Griffin Steele had rejected her in front of his entire pack. The pain of that rejection seemed distant now, overshadowed by the events of the past 24 hours. Her hand rose unconsciously to her throat, seeking the medallion that had been there her entire life. It was still in the healing chamber with Alexander. She felt strangely vulnerable without it, as if a piece of herself was missing. A soft knock at her door roused her from her thoughts. It was Magnus, looking tired but less grim than he had during their journey. "The king is asking for you," he said without preamble. "He's much improved and insists on speaking with you privately." Serafina followed Magnus through the torchlit corridors of Blackcrest, back to the healing chambers where she had left Alexander. The head healer met them at the door, her expression disapproving. "He should be resting," she scolded Magnus, "not conducting meetings." "Try telling him that," Magnus replied with the faintest hint of a smile. "You know how he is once his mind is set on something." The healer sighed and stepped aside, allowing Serafina to enter. Alexander was sitting up in bed, still pale but looking remarkably better than he had just hours before. The medallion was in his hand, and he was studying it intently. He looked up as Serafina entered, and again she was struck by the intensity of his gaze. Those unusual amber gold eyes seemed to see through all pretense, all barriers. "Leave us," he commanded the few attendants still in the room. When they had gone, he gestured for Serafina to sit in the chair beside his bed. "We have much to discuss, and I find I'm impatient for answers." Serafina sat, feeling suddenly nervous. This was the Alpha King, the most powerful werewolf in the known territories, and she was alone with him, a nobody from a minor pack. Except according to Magnus, she wasn't a nobody. She was Blackthorn blood. Alexander held out the medallion. "This belongs to you," he said. "It's been in your family for generations." Serafina took it, immediately feeling more centered as the familiar weight settled around her neck. "Thank you." During the blood ritual, Alexander continued, watching her closely, "I saw memories, your memories, the rejection ceremony, the Omega who raised you, your mother singing to you as a child." His brow furrowed. "But I also saw memories that couldn't be yours. Battles fought centuries ago, the building of Blackcrest, the first king of the United Packs taking his throne." Serafina nodded slowly. "I saw your memories too. The ambush in the forest, your father's coronation, your own 7 years ago." She hesitated. "And I saw something else, a darkness spreading over the territories, a threat you've been preparing for." Alexander's expression sharpened. "The blood ritual creates deeper connections than most realize. It seems we now share not only recent memories but ancestral ones as well." He leaned forward slightly, wincing at the movement. "What do you know of your mother's family?" "Nothing," Serafina admitted. "She never spoke of them. I assumed they had died in the territory wars, like my father." "Your father," Alexander said carefully, "was not who you believe him to be." He paused, seeming to choose his words with care. "According to the memories I glimpsed, your mother was indeed my father's cousin, making you and I distant cousins as well. But your father, he shook his head. "I need more information before I say more on that subject." Serafina felt a chill at his words. What secret about her parentage could be so significant that even the king hesitated to speak of it? "What happens now?" she asked instead. "To me, I mean. I have nowhere to return to. I was rejected by my pack." "Rejected," Alexander repeated, a dangerous edge entering his voice. "By Griffin Steel of the Ironwood Pack. 3 days ago, coinciding precisely with the attempt on my life by assassins using weapons and fighting techniques unique to the Ironwood territory." His eyes narrowed. "Did it never strike you as odd that the son of a pack beta would even consider an Omega of supposedly low status as a potential mate, only to reject her publicly at the last moment?" The implication hit Serafina like a physical blow. "You think You think my rejection was somehow connected to the attempt on your life? That's impossible. I'm nobody important." "Are you?" Alexander countered. "The daughter of a royal guard with Blackthorn blood, possessor of the royal medallion, with healing powers strong enough to neutralize silver poisoning." He shook his head. "I think you were rejected and driven from your pack specifically to prevent you from reaching your full potential. Someone wanted you isolated, vulnerable, and far from Blackcrest." Serafina's mind reeled with the implications. Her entire life had been a lie. Her rejection, the most painful experience she had ever endured, had been part of some political plot. "Why would anyone care so much about preventing me from coming to Blackcrest?" she asked, trying to make sense of it all. Alexander was silent for a long moment, studying her face as if searching for something specific. Finally he spoke, his voice low and intense. "There is a prophecy," he said, "one known only to the royal line and their most trusted advisors. It speaks of a time when the 7th king of the United Packs will face a darkness greater than any before, a threat to all werewolf kind. It says this king must find his true mate before the 7th dark moon of his reign, or he will fall to this darkness and all the territories with him." Serafina felt her breath catch. "The 7th dark moon," she repeated. "When is that?" 30 days from now," Alexander answered grimly. "I have ruled for 6 years and 11 months. For most of that time, I've searched for the mate mentioned in the prophecy with no success. Many have claimed to be the one, seeking the power and status of being queen. None have been true." His gaze intensified, locking with hers. "Last night, when you found me in that cave, when your blood mixed with mine as you treated my wounds, I felt something I've never experienced before. A connection, a recognition. The blood ritual tonight confirmed what I suspected. The mate bond beginning to form." Serafina stared at him in disbelief. "That's not possible," she whispered. "I was just rejected by my mate. The pain nearly broke me." "Griffin Steel was never your mate," Alexander said firmly. "The rejection was a political maneuver designed to break your spirit and keep you from finding your way to me. Think, Serafina, Did you feel the true mate bond forming with a griffin before the rejection? That deep sense of recognition, of coming home. Serafina thought back to her time with Griffin. There had been attraction, certainly, and she had believed herself in love. But that profound connection Alexander described? No, she had never felt that with Griffin. The prophecy speaks specifically of a healer with blackthorn blood, one who bears the royal medallion and has the power to turn back darkness, Alexander continued. You match every aspect of that description. You believe I'm your prophesied mate? Serafina asked, still struggling to process everything. The future queen of the United Pax? I believe, Alexander said carefully, that someone else also interpreted the prophecy that way and has been working very hard to prevent us from meeting. Someone who wants me to fail, to die at the seventh dark moon, leaving the territories vulnerable to whatever darkness is coming. He reached out, his hand hovering near hers but not quite touching, respecting boundaries despite the intimacy of their conversation. I'm not asking you to accept anything right now. The mate bond, if it truly exists between us, cannot be forced. It must be acknowledged freely by both parties. What I am asking is that you stay at Black Crest, at least until the seventh dark moon. Give us time to understand these connections we've both felt, to investigate who tried to kill me and who orchestrated your rejection. Serafina looked into his eyes, seeing not just the powerful Alpha King, but also the wounded wolf she had cared for through the night, the man who had protected her even at cost to himself. Whatever the truth about prophecies and mate bonds, she felt drawn to him in a way she couldn't explain. I'll stay, she agreed softly. I have nowhere else to go, and I want to understand what's happening. Why my mother kept so many secrets. Why someone would go to such lengths to keep us apart. Relief crossed Alexander's features. Thank you, he said simply. Then his expression darkened. You should know that staying won't be without risk. If Sebastian Steele and the Ironwood Pack are behind the assassination attempt, they won't be pleased to learn you found your way to Blackcrest. And there may be others involved. This plot feels too complex for one pack alone. I've survived rejection in a blizzard, found a dying wolf king and helped heal him. Discovered my entire heritage is not what I believed, and apparently awakened magical powers I didn't know I possessed, Serafina said with the ghost of a smile. I think I can handle a few more challenges. Alexander smiled back, the expression transforming his severe features into something truly striking. I begin to see why the prophecy might have chosen you, he said. Rest tonight. Tomorrow we begin unraveling these mysteries together. As Serafina left the healing chamber and made her way back to her guest quarters, her mind was a whirl with everything she had learned. Royal blood, prophecies, mate bonds with kings. It was too much to process at once. But beneath the confusion and disbelief, a small spark of something like hope had kindled in her chest. For the first time since Griffin's rejection, she felt a sense of purpose, of belonging. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever dangers threatened, she would face them. She touched the medallion at her throat, feeling its comforting weight. Perhaps this was what her mother had been preparing her for all along, with those strange songs and stories that now seemed less like nursery rhymes and more like lessons in disguise. As she reached her chambers, Serafina paused at the window once more, gazing out at the moonlit mountains. Somewhere in the distance, the wolves of the Ironwood Pack were going about their lives. Griffin Steele, perhaps already courting a more politically advantageous mate, never knowing that his rejection had set in motion events that might change the fate of all werewolf kind. Thank you, Griffin, Serafina whispered to the night. Your rejection wasn't an ending after all. It was the beginning of my true destiny. With that thought bringing a small smile to her lips, Serafina Morgan, possibly the future queen of the United Pax, turned from the window and prepared to face whatever tomorrow might bring at Blackcrest Fortress, her unexpected new home. The morning sun bathed Blackcrest Fortress in golden light, illuminating ancient stone walls that had stood for 7 centuries. Serafina Morgan stood on the balcony of her chamber in the royal wing, gazing out over the vast panorama of mountains and forests that stretched to the horizon. The events of the past few days still seemed surreal, finding a wounded wolf king in a sacred cave, discovering her royal bloodline, being brought to the legendary fortress that was apparently her ancestral home. Last night's revelation that she might be the prophesied mate of King Alexander Blackthorn, the very alpha destined to save werewolf kind from a coming darkness, felt impossible to process in the light of day. Just days ago, she had been publicly rejected by Griffin Steele, believed herself worthless and unwanted. Now she was being treated as royalty, addressed as Lady Morgan, and housed in chambers finer than anything she had ever known. A soft knock at her door pulled Serafina from her thoughts. A servant entered, bowing respectfully. "Commander Drake requests your presence in the great library, my lady. The king is waiting." Serafina followed the servant through the vast corridors of Blackcrest, trying to memorize the route through the labyrinthine fortress. Tapestries depicting ancient battles and coronations lined the walls. Display cases held artifacts that radiated age and power: ceremonial daggers, silver circlets, ancient scrolls. The medallion at her throat seemed to warm slightly as they passed certain objects, as though recognizing kindred magic. The great library occupied an entire wing of the fortress's upper level. When the massive oak doors swung open, Serafina couldn't suppress a gasp of wonder. The chamber was cavernous, with vaulted ceilings and walls entirely lined with books. Thousands upon thousands of volumes rising 3 stories high. Circular staircases connected the levels, and sunlight poured in through stained glass windows depicting the phases of the moon. In the center of the library stood a large table covered with ancient texts and maps. Alexander was bent over one of the maps, engaged in quiet conversation with Magnus Drake. Both men looked up as Serafina entered. Magnus bowed slightly, but Alexander's gaze locked with hers, those unusual amber gold eyes intense and searching. He looked remarkably recovered, dressed in royal blue and black, with a simple silver circlet resting on his midnight hair. He bore little resemblance to the dying wolf Serafina had found in the cave. Only the lingering pallor of his skin and the careful way he held himself betrayed his recent brush with death. "Lady Morgan," Alexander greeted her, his deep voice formal but warm. "I trust you slept well?" "Yes, Your Majesty," Serafina replied, the title still feeling foreign on her tongue. "The quarters are more luxurious than anything I've known." A slight smile touched Alexander's lips. "Please, when we're in private company, Alexander will suffice. After sharing blood, formality seems unnecessary." The reference to the blood ritual sent warmth rushing to Serafina's cheeks. The intimacy of that connection, his memories flowing into her, hers into him, had been unlike anything she had experienced. "We have much to discuss," Alexander continued, gesturing to the documents spread across the table. "About your heritage, about the attempt on my life, and about the prophecy that may bind our fates together." Magnus stepped forward, indicating a yellowed parchment covered in ancient script. "This is the Lunar Codex, the oldest record we have of werewolf history. It contains the original text of the 7th King prophecy." Serafina leaned forward to examine the document. The writing was in the same strange language as the symbols on her medallion, yet somehow she could understand fragments of it, as if the knowledge was buried in her blood. "When the 7th ruler of United Blood faces the darkness rising," she read aloud, surprising herself, "only the healing touch of his true mate, born of royal line but raised in shadow, can prevent the fall of all packs." Alexander and Magnus exchanged a glance. "You can read the ancient tongue," Magnus said, a note of awe in his voice. "That confirms it. Only those of pure Blackthorn blood can understand the language without study." "There's more," Alexander said, indicating another section of the parchment. "The prophecy speaks of specific signs by which the true mate might be known. Bearer of the royal sigil, touched by healing fire, rejected and forged in pain, found in the sacred cave of ancestors." Serafina's hand went instinctively to the medallion at her throat. The royal sigil. The golden glow that had emanated from her hands as she healed. Healing fire. Her rejection by Griffin, forged in pain. The ancient cave where she had found Alexander, sacred cave of ancestors. The parallels were undeniable. "This can't be coincidence," she whispered. "No," Alexander agreed, "which brings us to the question of your rejection. If the prophecy was known to others, if they understood that you were the one who could prevent my death at the 7th dark moon, then my rejection was orchestrated to keep us apart," Serafina finished, the full weight of the betrayal sinking in. "But who would know? You said the prophecy was known only to the royal line and trusted advisors." "Over the centuries, knowledge has a way of spreading," Magnus said grimly. "We've long suspected there might be a spy in the royal council, someone feeding information to those who wish to see the Blackthorn line end." "The Ironwood Pack has been gathering power for generations," Alexander added. "Sebastian Steele, as Beta, has been particularly aggressive in forming alliances with other territories. If I were to die without an heir or mate at the seventh dark moon, the resulting power vacuum could allow him to seize control of the United Pax. And his son Griffin was the one who rejected me, Seraphina said, understanding dawning. But how would they have known who I was? My mother kept my heritage secret. Even I didn't know. That, Alexander said, is what we need to discover. And quickly. The seventh dark moon is only 29 days away. He unrolled another map, a detailed depiction of the 7 territories. The Ironwood lands lie here to the southeast. 3 days ago, when I was ambushed, I was hunting near the border between our territories. The attack was well planned, with silver weapons that suggested foreknowledge of my presence. The Ironwood delegation had departed Blackcrest that very morning, Magnus added, claiming urgent pack business. Among them was Griffin Steele, who rejected you on the same day. Seraphina's mind was racing. But if they knew who I was, why not simply kill me? Why the public rejection? The prophecy specifically mentions rejected and forged in pain, Alexander pointed out. Perhaps they believed that by fulfilling that part of the prophecy through rejection, they could somehow control or nullify its power. Or perhaps they simply wanted to break your spirit, make you feel too worthless to ever find your way to Blackcrest. The library doors opened, interrupting their conversation. A striking woman in her mid-50s entered, her silver-streaked auburn hair pulled back in a warrior's braid, her bearing regal and confident. She wore leather armor similar to Magnus's, but with additional silver insignia denoting high rank. Victoria, Alexander greeted her. Thank you for coming. My king, she replied with a bow that managed to convey respect, while sacrificing none of her dignity. Her sharp gaze turned to Seraphina, assessing. So this is Elena's daughter. General Victoria Silverblade, Alexander introduced her. Commander of the Northern Forces and one of my most trusted advisors. She served with your mother in the Royal Guard. Victoria approached Seraphina, studying her face intently. You have her eyes, she said finally, and her stubborn chin. Elena was my closest friend and one of the finest warriors I've ever known. When she disappeared during the territory wars, I never believed she was dead. You knew my mother well? Seraphina asked eagerly. A shadow crossed Victoria's face. As well as anyone could. Elena kept her secrets close, especially toward the end. I've spent 20 years wondering what made her flee with you that night, why she felt she couldn't trust even me. Perhaps this will provide answers, Magnus said, indicating a small wooden chest on the table that Seraphina hadn't noticed before. It was found hidden in Elena Morgan's old quarters, sealed with a bloodlock that could only be opened by her kin. We've waited for your arrival to examine it. All eyes turned to Seraphina. With trembling hands, she approached the chest. It was intricately carved with the same symbols that adorned her medallion. When she touched it, she felt a subtle vibration, as if the box recognized her blood. Place your hand on the lock, Victoria instructed. Let it taste your blood. Seraphina pressed her palm against the ancient metal lock. A momentary sting, and she felt her blood being drawn into the mechanism. There was a soft click, and the lid unsealed. Inside lay a leather-bound journal in a smaller version of her medallion. A man's signet ring bearing the royal crest. Alexander leaned forward, recognizing the ring immediately. That belonged to my uncle, Prince Evander Blackthorne, he said softly. He vanished during the territory wars, presumed killed in battle. He was my father's younger brother, next in line for the throne after me. Seraphina picked up the journal with unsteady hands and opened it to find her mother's familiar handwriting. She began to read aloud. If you are reading this, my daughter, then you have found your way to Blackcrest at last, and the bloodlock has confirmed what I have kept hidden all these years. You are not merely of the Blackthorne line through me, but directly descended from royalty. Your father was not the Omega healer I claimed, but Prince Evander Blackthorne, second son of King Alaric, brother to Crown Prince Theron. Seraphina's voice faltered as the implication struck her. She wasn't just of Blackthorne blood, she was directly of the royal line, Alexander's cousin. Continue, Alexander urged, his expression unreadable. Our union was secret, forbidden not by royal decree, but by the lunar prophecy, which foresaw that a child of our blood would be the mate of the seventh king. When I discovered I was with child, I shared the news only with Evander. That same night, he was called to an emergency council meeting. He never returned. The next morning brought news of a skirmish on the border, with Prince Evander listed among the missing. But what few knew was that he had never arrived at the battle. He had been ambushed on his way to the meeting by assassins who knew exactly where he would be. I found evidence that someone on the royal council had betrayed him, the same faction that feared the fulfillment of the lunar prophecy. Knowing you would be in danger if your true parentage was discovered, I fled that night, taking only this journal, Evander's ring, and the royal medallion that was his gift to me. I found sanctuary in the Ironwood Pack, where no one knew my true identity, and raised you as the daughter of a fictional Omega healer who had died in the wars. If you are reading this, the time has come for the prophecy to be fulfilled. Trust no one except Victoria Silverblade and Magnus Drake if they still live. And remember, the darkness rising comes not just from outside our territories, but from within. The betrayal that took your father from us has poisoned the heart of Werewolf Society for a generation. Silence fell over the library as Serafina finished reading. She looked up to find Alexander staring at her with new intensity, the implications of her royal blood changing everything. "You're not just my prophesied mate," he said quietly. "You're the daughter of Prince Evander, rightful princess of the Blackthorn line, with a claim to the throne in your own right. This changes our understanding of the plot against you," Magnus said gravely. "If someone on the royal council betrayed Prince Evander 25 years ago, then the same traitor or their successor may be behind the attempt on my life," Alexander finished. "And they may now target Serafina as well, both as my potential mate and as Evander's heir." Victoria's expression had darkened as Serafina read, "I always suspected Evander's disappearance wasn't accidental. He was too skilled a warrior to be taken by surprise, unless betrayed by someone he trusted." "But who?" Serafina asked. "After 25 years, how can we possibly discover the truth?" "We begin with what we know," Alexander said decisively. "The Ironwood Pack rejected you on the same day I was ambushed. That connection cannot be coincidental." He turned to Magnus. "Summon the Royal Council for an emergency session this afternoon. It's time to smoke out our traitor." "Is that wise?" Victoria cautioned. "If the traitor sits on the council, warning them could drive them underground. Or force them to make a mistake," Alexander countered. "Besides, we need to formally introduce Princess Serafina to the court. Her royal blood gives her protection that mere Morgan blood would not." Serafina's head was spinning. "Princess? I've spent my entire life as a low-ranking Omega. I know nothing of court politics or royal protocol." Alexander's expression softened, "Which is why you'll need preparation before facing the council. Victoria will help you understand the court dynamics and teach you the basics of protocol." He hesitated, then added, "And I would like to show you something first. Something that might help you understand your heritage better." Magnus and Victoria exchanged glances, seeming to understand Alexander's intention. "I'll begin preparations for the council meeting," Magnus said, "and increase security around the royal wing." "I'll join you in this Hall of Ancients in an hour," Victoria told Serafina. "That should give you time." When they had left, Alexander extended his hand to Serafina. "Come, there's something you need to see." She placed her hand in his, trying to ignore the spark of electricity that passed between them at the contact. He led her through a hidden door at the back of the library, into a narrow passage that descended deep into the heart of the fortress. Torches sprang to life as they passed, illuminating ancient stonework carved with the history of the Blackthorn line. "Where are we going?" Serafina asked, her voice echoing slightly in the passage. "To the heart of Blackcrest," Alexander replied. "To the place where all Blackthorn rulers come in times of crisis and decision." The passage opened into a vast circular chamber deep beneath the fortress. At its center stood a massive crystal, taller than a man and pulsing with a soft silver light. The walls were lined with alcoves containing stone effigies of past rulers, each wearing a replica of the royal medallion around their necks. "The Moon Heart," Alexander said reverently. "The source of the Blackthorn line's power, created from the tears of the moon goddess herself, according to legend. It's said to show visions to those of royal blood in times of need." Serafina approached the crystal cautiously, drawn by its pulsing light. The medallion at her throat grew warm, then hot, as she neared the Moon Heart. "What do I do?" she whispered. "Place your hand upon it," Alexander instructed, coming to stand beside her. "Let it recognize your blood." Serafina reached out and placed her palm against the cool surface of the crystal. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a flash of heat shot through her arm, and the Moon Heart's glow intensified. Images began to form within its depths, flashes of the past, glimpses of possible futures. She saw a handsome young man with her eyes dressed in royal regalia, Prince Evander, her father. She saw her mother, younger and dressed as a royal guard, exchanging secret glances with the prince. A clandestine wedding ceremony in this very chamber, witnessed only by the Moonheart itself. The images shifted, showing her father leaving the fortress on the night of his disappearance. A shadowy figure watching from a window, then making a signal to someone waiting in the forest. The ambush, swift and brutal. Evander fighting valiantly, but eventually falling to a silver blade through the heart. His body being hidden in a sacred cave, the very cave where Seraphina had found Alexander. "The cave," she gasped. "My father died there." "What do you see?" Alexander asked, his voice seeming to come from far away. "My father's murder, the betrayal." The vision shifted again, showing a hooded figure receiving a pouch of gold from a tall man whose face remained in shadow. Someone was paid to betray him, to lead him into the ambush. The images blurred, then reformed to show the present, Alexander and Seraphina standing before the Moonheart. Then the future, the seventh dark moon rising over Blackcrest. A gathering of wolves in the great hall, a silver blade glinting in candlelight, blood on stone. With a gasp, Seraphina pulled her hand away from the crystal, breaking the connection. She stumbled backward, would have fallen if Alexander hadn't caught her in strong arms. "What did you see?" he asked urgently. "Death," she whispered. "At the seventh dark moon, in the great hall. Someone will try to kill us. Both of us." Alexander's arms tightened around her. "Did you see who?" Seraphina shook her head. "Just a blade, silver, and blood." She looked up at him, fear and determination warring in her expression. "The same type of blade that killed my father, that nearly killed you in the cave." Alexander's jaw tightened. "Then we know the threat is real, and the timeline is fixed. 29 days until the seventh dark moon. 29 days to discover who betrayed your father, who tried to kill me, and who plans to strike again at the dark moon ceremony." Seraphina stepped from his embrace, though part of her longed to remain in the safety of his arms. "How? We have so little to go on." "We start with what we know," Alexander replied. "The royal council, the Ironwood connection, and now the location of your father's remains." His expression softened. "We should retrieve them, give him a proper royal burial. It might smoke out the killer. Few can remain unmoved when confronted with their past crimes." Seraphina nodded, trying to process everything. The vision had left her feeling drained, but also more connected to her heritage than ever before. The Moonheart had recognized her. Her father had been murdered in the same cave where she had saved Alexander. Nothing about this could be coincidence. "There's one more thing you should see before we return," Alexander said, leading her to one of the alcoves on the far side of the chamber. Unlike the others, this one contained no effigy. Instead, a simple plaque read, "Prince Evander Blackthorn, second son of King Alaric, lost in the territory wars." Beside it was an empty alcove with no marking. "This one would have been mine had I died without fulfilling the prophecy," Alexander explained. "And this?" He indicated another empty space beside Evander's memorial. "This is where your effigy would stand, had your existence been known. Princess Seraphina Blackthorn, daughter of Prince Evander, cousin to King Alexander." Seraphina traced the letters of her father's name on the plaque. "He never even knew about me," she said softly. "Never knew I existed." "But he loved your mother," Alexander replied gently. "The Moonheart showed you their wedding. That was no small thing in those days, a prince marrying a royal guard. It would have caused a scandal at court, yet he chose love over politics. Unlike Griffin, who had chosen politics over love in rejecting her. The contrast was stark. Royal blood or not, Seraphina's experience with love had been one of pain and betrayal. How could she trust the mate bond forming between herself and Alexander? Prophecy or not? As if reading her thoughts, Alexander spoke softly. "I know this is overwhelming. Finding out who you truly are, being thrown into court politics, discovering a mate bond with a king you barely know, all while processing the rejection you experienced days ago. It's a lot," Seraphina admitted with a weak smile. "I won't press you on the mate bond," Alexander promised. "Prophecy or not, such things must develop naturally with trust and time. For now, let us focus on keeping you safe, discovering who betrayed your father, and preventing the assassination the Moonheart showed you." The sincerity in his eyes touched Seraphina deeply. This powerful alpha king, who could command anything he wanted, was instead giving her space and choice. It was a stark contrast to the controlling behavior she had experienced from Griffin, who had always subtly reminded her of his higher status. "Thank you," she said simply. They made their way back to the upper levels of the fortress in companionable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The revelation of Seraphina's true parentage changed everything: her place at court, her relationship to Alexander, the danger she faced. Victoria was waiting for them in the Hall of Ancients, a vast chamber lined with portraits of previous Blackthorn rulers. Her sharp eyes noted their serious expressions immediately. "What happened?" she asked without preamble. "The Moonheart showed Seraphina her father's murder," Alexander replied, "and a vision of another assassination attempt at the 7th Dark Moon ceremony." Victoria's hand went instinctively to the hilt of her sword. "Then we must double the guard for the ceremony, change all the security protocols. That won't help if the traitor is among the royal council with access to all our plans," Alexander pointed out. "Then we feed different information to different council members," Victoria suggested. "See which version reaches our enemies." "A good strategy," Alexander agreed. "But first, Seraphina needs to be prepared for the council meeting this afternoon. I'll leave you to it." He turned to Seraphina, his expression softening slightly. "Remember, you are Princess Seraphina Blackthorn now. No one at that council table outranks you except me. Stand tall." After he had gone, Victoria gestured for Seraphina to sit at a long table beneath the portrait of King Alaric. Her grandfather, Seraphina realized with a shock. "The Royal Council consists of 12 members," Victoria began without preamble. "The king, the commanders of the 4 territorial forces, of which I am one, the royal healer, the keeper of laws, and 5 representatives from the most powerful packs." "Including the Ironwood pack?" Seraphina asked. Victoria nodded grimly. "Sebastian Steele himself holds the Ironwood seat. He's ambitious, cunning, and has been maneuvering for greater power for decades. If anyone had motive to eliminate Prince Evander and now King Alexander, it would be him." "His son rejected me," Seraphina said, "on the same day Alexander was ambushed." "Too neat to be coincidence," Victoria agreed. "But Sebastian is clever. He wouldn't leave such an obvious trail unless he wanted to. We must consider that we might be being led toward him to distract from the true culprit. Who else has the motive and opportunity?" Victoria's expression grew thoughtful. "Lord Thaddeus Frost, representative of the Northern Pacts, has always resented Blackthorn rule. His ancestor challenged the first Blackthorn king and lost. The family has never forgotten that humiliation." She tapped her fingers on the table, considering. "Lady Isolde Nightshade, the royal healer, has access to all manner of poisons and potions, including silver compounds. And she was close to your father. Some said too close. She might have had personal reasons to want him gone." "And the others?" "Darius Stonefall, commander of the Southern forces, is blindly ambitious. Garrett Riverwind of the Western Pacts has ties to old magic that make him dangerous. And Elias Thornhart, keeper of laws, knows more secrets than anyone in the kingdom. Knowledge is power, and he has used it to manipulate court politics for decades." Seraphina's head was spinning with names and motives. How was she supposed to identify a traitor among such powerful, practiced politicians when she had spent her life as a simple healer in a minor pack? "How do I address them? How do I behave?" she asked, practical concerns momentarily overshadowing the larger dangers. Victoria's expression softened slightly. "You are royalty by blood. Address the king as your majesty initially, then my king thereafter. Address council members as lord or lady, followed by their surname. Stand straight, speak clearly, and never apologize for taking up space. You are Princess Seraphina Blackthorn, daughter of Prince Evander. You outrank everyone in that room except the king himself." She paused, her gaze assessing Seraphina's simple dress. "But first, we need to make sure you look the part. Come, the royal seamstress will have something suitable." 2 hours later, Seraphina barely recognized herself in the mirror. Gone was the simple Omega healer from the Ironwood pack. In her place stood a princess of the Blackthorn line. Her dark hair had been styled in an elegant arrangement that showcased the graceful curve of her neck, while incorporating small braids that symbolized royal lineage. She wore a gown of deep midnight blue with silver accents, the colors of the Blackthorn house, with her mother's medallion prominently displayed at her throat and her father's signet ring on her right hand. "The council will be watching for signs of weakness," Victoria advised as they made their way toward the council chambers. "Show none. You are the daughter of Prince Evander, the prophesied mate of King Alexander, and the rightful princess of the realm. Let them see that in every step, every glance, every word. The great doors of the council chamber open, revealing a circular room dominated by a massive round table carved from a single ancient tree. 12 high-backed chairs surrounded it, each emblazoned with the crest of its occupant. Alexander sat at the head position, resplendent in formal attire, the silver crown of the United Pax gleaming against his dark hair. Magnus stood at his right hand, vigilant as always. The other council members were already seated. Serafina felt their collective gaze like a physical weight as she entered. Surprise, calculation, and in some cases, poorly disguised alarm flashed across aristocratic features. One man, tall, with silver at his temples and cold blue eyes, actually half rose from his seat in shock before composing himself. Sebastian Steele, Serafina guessed, recognizing the same proud bearing his son Griffin possessed. "My lords and ladies of the council," Alexander's voice rang out, commanding immediate attention. "I present to you Princess Serafina Blackthorne, daughter of Prince Evander Blackthorne and Lady Elena Morgan, rightful princess of the realm, and my cousin by blood." A stunned silence fell over the chamber, followed by a rising tide of murmurs. Sebastian Steele's face had gone carefully blank, revealing nothing of his thoughts, but his knuckles were white where they gripped the edge of the table. "This is unexpected news, Your Majesty," said an elderly man with sharp features and calculating eyes. Elias Thornhart, the keeper of laws, Serafina guessed. "The princess's claim has been verified by bloodlock, by the Moonheart itself, and by documentation found in her mother's sealed possessions," Alexander confirmed. "Princess Serafina's identity is beyond dispute." "Most remarkable," said a woman with silver-streaked dark hair and eyes that seemed to miss nothing, likely Lady Isolde, the royal healer. "And most fortunate that she should appear just as Your Majesty approaches the seventh dark moon." There was something in her tone that suggested she found the timing suspicious rather than fortunate. Serafina noted the subtle exchange of glances between Lady Isolde and Lord Sebastian. "Allies, perhaps?" "Indeed," Alexander agreed smoothly. "The princess's appearance may well be the fulfillment of the lunar prophecy, which foretold that the seventh king would be saved by his true mate, born of royal line but raised in shadow." Another ripple of reaction passed through the council. Some leaned forward with interest, others back as if distancing themselves from the revelation. "The princess will be joining our council effective immediately, taking the seat that would have been her father's," Alexander continued, gesturing to an empty chair that servants hastily prepared with the Blackthorn crest. "And she brings grave news. The Moonheart has shown her a vision of Prince Evander's murder 25 years ago. Not a battle casualty, as was believed, but an assassination orchestrated by a traitor within these very walls." The tension in the room became palpable. Serafina studied each face, looking for signs of guilt or excess fear, but these were all practiced politicians who had survived decades of court intrigue. Their expressions revealed only what they wished to show. "Furthermore," Alexander continued, his tone hardening, "the princess has seen a vision of another assassination attempt to occur at the seventh dark moon ceremony, targeting both herself and me. An attempt connected to the recent ambush that nearly claimed my life 3 days ago." Now the reactions were more visible. Shock, concern, and in some cases a calculating assessment that chilled Serafina's blood. "These are serious allegations, Your Majesty." Sebastian Steele spoke at last, his deep voice carefully controlled. "Has the princess identified this supposed traitor in her visions?" "Not yet," Alexander replied. "But we have evidence connecting the ambush to activities of the Ironwood Pack. Curious, Lord Sebastian, that your son rejected Princess Serafina as a mate on the very same day I was attacked, when she was still living in your territory under the name Serafina Morgan." All eyes turned to Sebastian, whose expression darkened. "My son's personal affairs are hardly matters of state, Your Majesty, and I resent the implication that the Ironwood Pack would be involved in treason." "No implication was made, Lord Sebastian," Alexander said mildly. "Merely an observation of timing that requires explanation." "My son rejected the girl because she was unsuitable," Sebastian said dismissively, not even looking at Serafina. "An Omega of no standing or value. Had we known of her true heritage, naturally things would have been different." Serafina felt a surge of anger at his tone. Before she could stop herself, she spoke. "Yet your son courted me for months, Lord Sebastian, knowing my supposed low status. only to reject me publicly at the last moment, on the exact day King Alexander was ambushed. One might almost think the rejection was timed specifically to drive me away from Packlands in distress, ensuring I would be alone and vulnerable in the wilderness. Her voice rang clear and strong in the council chamber, surprising even herself. Sebastian's eyes narrowed dangerously. "You presume much, girl, princess or not," he said coldly. "My son's decisions are his own." "Are they?" Serafina countered, gaining confidence. "Or does the son follow the father's orders, even in matters of the heart?" Sebastian half rose from his seat, anger flashing in his eyes, but Alexander's voice cut through the tension. "Enough. We are not here to trade accusations, but to address a threat to the throne and the United Pax." His gaze swept the council. "In light of these developments, security throughout Blackcrest will be increased. The seventh Dark Moon ceremony will proceed as planned, but with additional precautions that Commander Drake will implement." He turned to Serafina. "Tomorrow, Princess Serafina and I will lead an expedition to recover Prince Evander's remains from the sacred cave where she found me. He will be given the royal burial he was denied 25 years ago." This announcement caused another stir among the council members. Lady Isolde leaned forward. "Is it wise for both you and the princess to leave the safety of Blackcrest, Your Majesty, especially given the visions of assassination?" "The recovery of my uncle's remains cannot wait," Alexander said firmly, "and it may provide clues to the identity of the traitor. The princess will accompany me, along with an elite guard led by Commander Drake and General Silverblade. The council should be represented as well," Lord Thaddeus Frost spoke for the first time, his northern accent pronounced, "to witness and validate the findings." Alexander inclined his head. "A fair suggestion. Lord Thaddeus, Lady Isolde, you will accompany us as council representatives." Serafina noticed a flash of something. Satisfaction? Concern? Crossed Lady Isolde's features before her expression smoothed into diplomatic neutrality. "As you wish, Your Majesty," she said with a graceful inclination of her head. Alexander rose, signaling the end of the meeting. "We depart at dawn. In the meantime, I suggest we all consider where our loyalties truly lie. The United Pax have prospered under Blackthorn rule for 7 generations. I intend to ensure it continues for 7 more, despite the dark prophecy of the 7th king." As the council members filed out, Serafina remained seated, trying to process everything that had transpired. She had entered the chamber a novice to court politics and now found herself at the center of a deadly game of power and prophecy. Sebastian Steele was the last to leave, pausing at the door to look back at Serafina with an expression that sent chills down her spine. Not anger or fear, but a cold calculation that suggested he was already adjusting his plans to account for her presence. When only Alexander, Magnus, and Victoria remained, Serafina let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "You did well," Victoria said approvingly. "Standing up to Sebastian was risky, but earned you respect from the others." "I shouldn't have lost my temper," Serafina replied, still unsettled by Sebastian's parting look. "On the contrary," Alexander said, coming to sit beside her. "It showed strength. The council respects power, not politeness." His expression grew serious. "But we must be cautious. The traitor was definitely in that room, watching, listening, planning." "Lord Sebastian seemed the most affected by my presence," Serafina observed. "Too affected, perhaps," Magnus said thoughtfully, "almost as if he wanted us to suspect him." "A distraction?" Victoria suggested. "Possibly," Alexander agreed, "which is why I've assigned both Lady Isolde and Lord Thaddeus to accompany us tomorrow. If either is involved in the conspiracy, the journey to the sacred cave may reveal it. And if Sebastian is the traitor, separating him from his potential allies might force him to act rashly," Magnus added. Alexander turned to Serafina. "You're at the center of this now, whether you wish to be or not. The council knows who you are. The traitor knows their plans are threatened by your existence. You'll need to be on your guard every moment." "I'm not a warrior," Serafina said, glancing at Victoria's sword and Magnus's battle-scarred hands. "I'm a healer." "Sometimes healing is exactly what's needed in a battle," Alexander replied. "But Victoria will begin training you in basic self-defense tomorrow during our journey. Your royal blood gives you certain natural advantages in strength and speed that you may not have recognized growing up as an Omega." The reminder of her dual nature, Omega by nurture, royal by blood, struck Serafina forcefully. She had spent her entire life believing herself weak, submissive by nature, only to discover that royal Blackthorn blood ran in her veins. How much of her personality was truly hers, and how much was a role she had been conditioned to play? What happens after we recover my father's remains? She asked, pushing these unsettling thoughts aside for the moment. We continue investigating the connections between your rejection, the ambush, and the original assassination, Alexander replied. And we prepare for the seventh Dark Moon ceremony, when the traitor will make their final move according to your vision. He hesitated, then added more softly, and we explore the mate bond that seems to be forming between us. Prophecy or not, such connections can't be forced. They must grow naturally or not at all. The gentleness in his voice touched Serafina deeply. Despite the ruthless political calculation he had shown in the council meeting, there was a core of compassion in Alexander that reminded her of the wounded wolf she had first encountered. Powerful but vulnerable, dangerous but capable of trust. 28 days until the dark moon, Victoria noted. Not much time to solve a 25-year-old murder, identify a traitor, prevent an assassination, and confirm a prophesied mate bond. We've faced worse odds, Magnus said with grim humor. Remember the Battle of Ravenswood Pass? 300 against 3,000, and here we stand. This battle will not be won with swords alone, Alexander said, his gaze still on Serafina, but with truth, loyalty, and perhaps a bit of the moon goddess's blessing. As they left the council chamber, Serafina caught a glimpse of movement in a shadowed alcove, a figure withdrawing hastily as if not wanting to be seen. She tensed, but by the time she thought to alert Alexander, the figure was gone. Who had been listening? And what had they heard? The game of secrets and shadows had begun, and Serafina, princess or not, felt woefully unprepared for what lay ahead. That evening, Serafina stood on the balcony of her chambers, watching the stars emerge above the mountains. A crescent moon hung in the sky, a reminder that the dark moon was approaching day by day. She touched the medallion at her throat, trying to reconcile the Omega healer she had been raised to be with the royal princess she apparently was. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. A servant entered, bowing low. King Alexander requests your presence in his private study, Your Highness. Serafina followed the servant through corridors she was still learning, up a spiral staircase, and into a warm, book-lined room at the top of the fortress's highest tower. Alexander stood by a large window, gazing out at the same stars she had been contemplating. He turned as she entered, and for a moment, they simply looked at each other, king and princess, alpha and omega, possible mates according to an ancient prophecy. Thank you for coming, he said, gesturing to a comfortable chair near the fire. I wanted to speak with you privately before tomorrow's expedition. Serafina sat, noting the informality of the setting. No throne, no guards, just two people in a comfortable room with a crackling fire. Alexander took the chair opposite her, his usual regal bearing softened in the warm light. This has been an overwhelming day for you, he observed. Discovering your royal heritage, facing the council, learning of your father's murder. How are you feeling? The simple question, asked with genuine concern, broke through Serafina's careful composure. Confused, she admitted. Yesterday I was a rejected Omega with no future. Today I'm apparently a princess with royal blood, possible heir to the throne, target of assassins, and prophesied mate to a king I barely know. It's a lot to process. A small smile touched Alexander's lips. An understatement, if ever I heard one. He leaned forward slightly. I want you to know that despite the prophecy, despite the political advantages of our potential union, I have no intention of forcing or rushing a mate bond. Such connections must be built on trust and mutual choice. The sincerity in his voice touched Serafina deeply. That means more than you know, she said softly. My experience with Griffin was different. Tell me, Alexander encouraged. If we are to trust each other, I should understand what you've experienced. Serafina hesitated, then found herself sharing what she had never spoken of before. Griffin always made me feel less. He would praise me in one breath and remind me of my low status in the next. He pursued me publicly, but he always kept a certain distance in private. Looking back, I can see he was playing a role, perhaps on his father's orders. Alexander's expression darkened. The Steels have much to answer for. What troubles me most is not knowing how much was real, Serafina continued. Did Griffin ever have feelings for me, or was it all a calculated plan to keep me isolated until the rejection could be staged? Was everything in my life, even my mother's choice to raise me in the Ironwood Pack, part of someone else's strategy? Not everything, Alexander said firmly. Your compassion, your healing gift, your courage in helping a wounded stranger in a blizzard, those are yours alone, shaped by your choices, not someone else's plans. His words settled something in Serafina's turbulent thoughts. Whatever manipulation had occurred, her core self remained her own. Tomorrow will be difficult, Alexander continued after a moment. Returning to the sacred cave, finding your father's remains, it won't be easy. But I believe it's necessary, not just for the investigation, but for your own sense of closure. And what if we find nothing? Serafina asked. What if the Moonheart's vision was wrong? The Moonheart doesn't lie, Alexander said with quiet certainty. Though its truths can sometimes be difficult to interpret, if your father's remains are there, we will find them, and perhaps with them, evidence that points to his killer. He rose and moved to a cabinet, returning with 2 small glasses and a decanter of amber liquid. Moon whiskey, he explained, pouring a small amount into each glass. Traditionally shared between royals before important journeys. My father shared it with me before my coronation. It seems fitting now. Serafina accepted the glass, noting the rich, spicy aroma. Alexander raised his in a toast. To truth discovered, justice served, and bonds freely chosen, he said. To truth, justice, and choice, Serafina echoed, sipping the whiskey and feeling its warmth spread through her chest. They talked for another hour, not of prophecies or politics, but of simpler things. Alexander spoke of his childhood at Blackcrest, of learning to hunt in the royal forests, of his father's wisdom and his mother's gentle strength. Serafina shared memories of her mother's healing songs, of learning to identify herbs in the forest, of the quiet moments that had shaped her understanding of the world. By the time Serafina returned to her chambers, a subtle shift had occurred between them. Not the mate bond of prophecy, perhaps, but something equally important: the beginnings of trust, of friendship, of connection freely chosen rather than forced by fate or politics. As she prepared for sleep, knowing the dawn would bring a difficult journey to her father's resting place, Serafina found herself thinking not of the dangers ahead, but of the surprising comfort she had found in Alexander's company. Whatever destiny the prophecy had planned for them, tonight had been about choice. His choice to offer respect and space, her choice to share her thoughts and concerns. In a world where so much seemed predetermined by bloodlines and ancient prophecies, that freedom of choice felt precious indeed. And as she drifted towards sleep, Serafina realized that for the first time since Griffin's rejection, she was looking toward the future not with fear, but with a cautious hope. The 7th dark moon still loomed. The traitor still lurked within the council, and the prophecy's outcome remained uncertain. But tonight, in the quiet of Blackcrest Fortress, under a crescent moon, Princess Serafina Blackthorn had found something she thought lost forever after her rejection: the possibility that she might someday trust her heart again. The journey back to the sacred cave began at dawn, as the first golden rays of sunlight crested the mountain peaks surrounding Blackcrest Fortress. A small, elite company assembled in the fortress courtyard. King Alexander, resplendent in royal armor bearing the Blackthorn crest. Princess Serafina, dressed in a practical riding outfit of dark blue and silver, her mother's medallion gleaming at her throat. Commander Magnus Drake with a dozen of his finest royal guards. General Victoria Silverblade, her keen eyes missing nothing. And the 2 council representatives, Lady Isolde Nightshade and Lord Thaddeus Frost. The expedition departed with little ceremony, moving swiftly through the mountain passes that Serafina had traversed alone just days before. The journey that had taken her 3 days as a solitary, rejected Omega now required only hours with proper mounts and guides who knew the terrain. Yet Serafina felt the weight of every mile, knowing they were retracing not only her desperate flight, but also her father's final path 25 years earlier. As they rode, Victoria guided her horse alongside Serafina's, continuing the princess's education in court politics that they had begun the previous day. "Watch Lady Isolde," Victoria murmured, her voice pitched low enough that only Serafina could hear. "She was your father's contemporary at court, rumored to have harbored feelings for him before he met your mother." Serafina glanced toward the royal healer, who rode near the front of the company beside Alexander. Lady Isolde was a striking woman in her early 50s, with silver-streaked dark hair and the poised confidence of someone accustomed to power. She appeared to be engaged in serious conversation with the king. "Do you suspect her?" Serafina asked quietly. "I suspect everyone," Victoria replied with grim pragmatism. "Isolde had motive, jealousy over your father's choice of mate and means, as royal healer with access to all manner of poisons. But she's also been loyal to the Blackthorn line for decades. It's complicated. And Lord Thaddeus? Victoria's gaze shifted to the northern representative, a tall man with ice-blue eyes and a perpetual frown. The Frost family has ancient grievances against the Blackthorns. The first king defeated Thaddeus's ancestor in single combat to unite the packs. Some wounds never truly heal, even after 7 generations. By midday, the company had reached the foothills of the mountains, where the blizzard had first overtaken Serafina. The landscape looked vastly different without the blanket of snow. Green valleys nestled between rocky outcroppings, streams swollen with snowmelt cutting through meadows dotted with early spring flowers. "We approach the sacred lands," Alexander announced, reining in his mount beside Serafina's. "These territories belong to no pack. They are the ancient grounds where the first wolves communed with the moon goddess before the formation of the united packs." Serafina felt a strange resonance at his words, as if the very land recognized her blood. The medallion at her throat grew warm against her skin, and she noticed Alexander watching her intently. "You feel it," he observed, "the connection to this place. It's in our blood. The Blackthorn line has always had a special relationship with the sacred lands." "It feels familiar," Serafina admitted. "Even when I was lost in the blizzard, something drew me to that specific cave." "The blood remembers," Alexander said, echoing what Magnus had told her at her first sight of Blackcrest. "Perhaps you were meant to find that cave, just as you were meant to find me wounded there." The implication of fate guiding their meeting hung between them, neither quite ready to embrace the idea of a predetermined bond, yet unable to deny the remarkable series of events that had brought them together. By late afternoon, they had reached the stand of ancient pines that partially concealed the cave entrance. Serafina felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air, as she recognized the site where her life had changed so dramatically just days ago. "This is it," she said, dismounting. "This is where I found shelter from the storm. Where I found you." Alexander dismounted as well, his expression solemn as he surveyed the cave entrance. "And where, according to the Moonheart's vision, your father was laid to rest 25 years ago." The company secured their horses and prepared to enter the cave. Magnus organized his guards in a defensive perimeter, clearly taking no chances with both the king and princess in potentially vulnerable territory. "Lady Isolde, Lord Thaddeus," Alexander addressed the council representatives, "you are here to witness what we find and report back to the council. I trust you understand the gravity of this mission." Both nodded, though Serafina noticed Lady Isolde's gaze lingering on the cave entrance with an expression she couldn't quite decipher: anticipation, concern, fear. "The princess will lead the way," Alexander continued. "She knows this cave better than any of us." Serafina stepped forward, torch in hand, and entered the familiar darkness. The painted chamber looked much as she had left it, her small fire pit still visible near the entrance. The ancient images of wolves and moons seemed to shift in the flickering torchlight, almost alive with movement. "These paintings are thousands of years old," Lady Isolde observed, studying them with scholarly interest. "From the first age when our kind still communed directly with the moon goddess." "The oldest records in the Blackcrest Library mention this cave," Lord Thaddeus added. "A place where the veil between worlds is thin, where past, present, and future blur together." Serafina led them deeper, past the painted chamber to the narrow passage that descended into the heart of the mountain. The air grew colder, charged with that strange energy she had noticed during her first exploration. The medallion at her throat pulsed with warmth, as if responding to something in the depths of the cave. "This way," she said, following the pull of the medallion more than her own memory. The passage opened into the second chamber with its high ceiling and ancient altar stone. Beyond that lay the circular room where she had found Alexander, gravely wounded on that fateful night. Only now, with multiple torches illuminating the space, could Serafina fully appreciate the majesty of the chamber. The stone columns carved to resemble howling wolves, the intricate symbols etched into the floor in a circular pattern, the natural dome overhead where a shaft of light penetrated from some opening far above. "This is where I found you," she told Alexander, who was examining the chamber with intense interest. "And where the Moonheart showed your father's body being hidden," he replied, his voice hushed in the sacred space. Lady Isolde moved to the center of the chamber, kneeling to examine the stone dais where Alexander had lain wounded. "This is a ritual space," she said, "ancient, powerful. The symbols on the floor form a lunar calendar." "We should search for Prince Evander's remains," Magnus suggested, practical as always. The chamber isn't large, but there could be hidden alcoves or burial niches. They spread out, examining the walls and floor of the circular chamber. Serafina found herself drawn to the far side opposite the entrance, where the shadows seemed deepest. Her medallion grew almost uncomfortably hot against her skin as she approached. "Here," she called, her voice echoing slightly. "There's something here." The others gathered around as Serafina's torch revealed a section of wall that appeared slightly different from the rest. The stone a shade lighter. The joints more recent. "A sealed chamber," Alexander observed. "Magnus?" The commander stepped forward, running experienced hands over the stonework. "Not original to the cave," he confirmed. "This was added later, perhaps 25 years ago." Victoria unsheathed her sword. "Stand back." With practiced precision, she inserted the blade into a narrow seam between stones and applied pressure. There was a grinding sound and a section of the wall swung inward, revealing a hidden alcove beyond. The torchlight illuminated what they had come to find, a stone bier upon which lay the skeletal remains of a man, still partially clothed in the rotted remnants of what had once been royal garments. A silver circlet rested upon the skull, and the tattered cloak bore the unmistakable emblem of the Blackthorn house. "Prince Evander," Alexander said softly, removing his own circlet in a gesture of respect. Serafina stared at the remains of the father she had never known, emotions warring within her. Grief for what might have been, anger at those who had stolen his life and her birthright. A strange sense of connection to this man who had loved her mother enough to risk scandal and tradition. Lady Isolde stepped closer to the bier, her healer's eyes assessing the remains with professional detachment that nonetheless couldn't quite mask a deeper emotion in her gaze. "Silver blade to the heart," she observed, indicating the skeletal chest where a jagged hole was visible in the ribs directly over where the heart would have been. "A killing blow designed specifically for a werewolf of royal blood. The same type of weapon used in the ambush against me," Alexander noted grimly. Serafina approached the bier slowly, drawn by something gleaming among the remains. A silver pendant similar to her own medallion, but fashioned as a man's amulet. With trembling fingers, she reached for it. The moment her skin made contact with the silver, a jolt of energy surged through her. The medallion at her throat flared with blinding light, and images flooded her mind. Her father's final moments, the face of his killer, the pronouncement of words in the ancient tongue that sealed his fate. Serafina gasped, staggering backward. Alexander caught her, his strong arms steadying her as the vision faded. "What did you see?" he asked urgently. "His death," Serafina whispered, her voice shaking. "I saw who killed him." All eyes turned to her, the chamber suddenly silent save for the soft hiss of the torches. "It was?" Serafina hesitated, the revelation almost too shocking to voice. "It was Lady Isolde, but she wasn't alone. She was working with someone else, someone who stayed in shadow, whose face I couldn't see." Lady Isolde's expression froze, then twisted into something cold and calculating. Before anyone could react, she had withdrawn a small vial from her robes and smashed it against the stone floor. Thick, choking smoke billowed upward, filling the chamber instantly. "Protect the king and princess," Magnus shouted, his voice muffled by the smoke. Confusion reigned in the darkness. Serafina felt Alexander's grip on her tighten, then suddenly release as something heavy struck him. She heard his grunt of pain, felt him fall. "Alexander!" she cried, dropping to her knees beside him. Through the swirling smoke, she caught a glimpse of Lady Isolde moving with surprising speed toward the chamber exit, a silver dagger clutched in her hand. Lord Thaddeus was close behind her, his own weapon drawn, not coming to their aid, Serafina realized with horror, but escaping with the assassin. "Traitors!" Victoria's voice rang out, followed by the clash of metal as she engaged one of them. Serafina turned her attention back to Alexander, who was struggling to rise, one hand pressed to his side where blood seeped between his fingers. "Silver blade," he gasped, "not deep, but poisoned. I can feel it spreading." Terror gripped Serafina's heart. "No, I won't lose you too." Acting on instinct, she placed her hands over his wound. The medallion at her throat blazed with golden light, and she felt power surge through her. The same healing energy that had manifested when she first treated Alexander in the cave, but stronger now, fueled by desperation and something deeper, something she wasn't yet ready to name. Golden light spread from her hands into Alexander's wound, neutralizing the silver poison as it had during the ritual at Blackcrest. Alexander's breathing steadied, his eyes clearing as the healing power coursed through him. "Find them," he ordered Magnus, who had fought his way through the dissipating smoke. "Don't let them escape." Magnus nodded grimly and rushed from the chamber with several guards. Victoria remained positioned protectively near the exit, her sword still drawn and her expression murderous. "Lord Thaddeus was with her," she reported. "I wounded him, but they both fled up the passage." "Two traitors on the council," Alexander said, his voice stronger as Seraphina's healing magic did its work. "Working together all these years." "But why?" Seraphina asked, helping him to his feet. "What could possibly motivate such a betrayal?" "Power," Alexander replied simply. "The oldest motivation of all. With me dead and no heir, the united packs would fracture. In the chaos, those positions strategically could seize control of significant territories." "We need to return to Blackcrest immediately," Victoria urged. "If Isolde and Thaddeus were willing to act so boldly here, they may have allies ready to move against the fortress in our absence." Alexander nodded in agreement, though his gaze remained on Seraphina. "Your healing power saved me again. It's growing stronger." "I couldn't let you die," Seraphina said simply, suddenly aware of how true those words were, how deeply the thought of losing him affected her. Something shifted in Alexander's expression, a softening, a recognition. But before he could speak, Magnus returned, his expression grim. "They've escaped," he reported, horses ready and waiting, and they had head start enough to be well away. "I've sent riders in pursuit, but the mountain trails offer many places to disappear." "We'll find them," Alexander said with quiet certainty. "But first, we must secure Blackcrest and alert the remaining council members of the betrayal." He turned to the stone bier where his uncle's remains lay. "And we must bring Prince Evander home to rest among his ancestors." With reverent care, they wrapped Prince Evander's remains in a ceremonial cloak that Victoria had brought for this purpose. Alexander himself carried the burden as they left the sacred cave, the company now tense and watchful, alert for any sign of ambush along the return journey. As they rode hard for Blackcrest, Seraphina's mind whirled with revelations. Lady Isolde, the elegant, respected royal healer, had murdered her father 25 years ago and had just attempted to kill Alexander. Lord Thaddeus, representative of the Northern Pax, was her accomplice. How deep did the conspiracy run? Who else on the council might be involved? And what of Sebastian Steele, whose son had rejected Seraphina with such calculated timing? Was he part of this plot as well? Or was he pursuing his own agenda? The sun was setting by the time they reached Blackcrest Fortress, the massive stone walls glowing amber in the fading light. To their relief, all appeared normal, no signs of attack or uprising. The gates opened at their approach, guards saluting as the king's party entered. In the courtyard, Alexander issued swift commands. Prince Evander's remains were taken to the temple for preparation for a royal funeral. Guards were dispatched to secure Lady Isolde's and Lord Thaddeus's quarters and to detain any of their known associates for questioning. Runners were sent to summon the remaining council members for an emergency session. "Seraphina," Alexander said, his voice gentler as he turned to her, "you should rest. Today has been—" "I'm coming to the council meeting," she interrupted firmly. "My father was murdered by these traitors. They just tried to kill you. I have every right to be there when we decide how to proceed." A smile touched Alexander's lips, admiration clear in his eyes. "As you wish, Princess. The meeting will convene in 1 hour in my private council chamber, more secure than the main hall." The hour gave them just enough time to wash away the dust of travel and change into suitable attire. Seraphina chose a gown of deep blue with silver embroidery, her mother's medallion at her throat and her father's signet ring, recovered from his remains, on her right hand. The weight of her heritage had never felt more tangible. The private council chamber was smaller than the formal hall, with room for only 12 around the polished oak table. When Seraphina entered alongside Victoria, Alexander was already present, deep in conversation with Magnus. The remaining council members arrived shortly after: Lord Darius Stonefall, commander of the Southern Forces; Garrett Riverwind of the Western Pax; Elias Thornhart, keeper of laws; and Sebastian Steele, who entered last, his cold eyes assessing the room with calculation barely concealed behind a mask of concern. "Where are Lady Isolde and Lord Thaddeus?" he inquired, noting their absence. "That," Alexander replied coldly, "is precisely why we are here." He gestured for all to be seated, then remained standing, his presence commanding complete attention. Today, we journeyed to the sacred cave to recover Prince Evander's remains as planned. What we discovered there was more than we anticipated. He described the hidden chamber, the confirmation that Prince Evander had been murdered by a silver blade to the heart, and Seraphina's vision revealing Lady Isolde as the killer. When confronted with this revelation, Lady Isolde attempted to assassinate both Princess Seraphina and myself, Alexander continued, his voice hard as steel. Lord Thaddeus revealed himself as her accomplice. Both have fled and are now declared traitors to the crown and the United Pax. The shock that rippled through the chamber seemed genuine, even from Sebastian Steele, whose expression had darkened to one of genuine concern. Two council members in league against the throne, Elias Thornhart murmured, his aged voice trembling slightly. In all my years as keeper of laws, I've never... The question, Sebastian interrupted, is whether they acted alone or as part of a larger conspiracy. His gaze slid meaningfully to Seraphina, and how this affects the situation with the princess and the seventh dark moon. Are you implying something, Lord Sebastian? Victoria asked sharply. Sebastian spread his hands in a gesture of innocence, merely voicing what we must all be considering. Lady Isolde and Lord Thaddeus were not known to be close allies. Their cooperation suggests a broader plot. We must consider all possibilities. Including your own involvement? Magnus suggested bluntly. Your son rejected Princess Seraphina on the very day King Alexander was ambushed. An ambush that bears striking similarities to Prince Evander's murder 25 years ago. Sebastian's expression hardened. My son's actions were his own, as I've said before, and I resent the implication that the Ironwood Pack would be involved in treason. No implication was made, Alexander said mildly, though his eyes were sharp. Merely an observation of timing that requires explanation, particularly in light of today's events. Before Sebastian could respond, the chamber doors burst open. A guard entered, breathing hard from running. Your Majesty, forgive the interruption. We've captured one of the traitors, Lord Thaddeus. He was attempting to flee through the northern pass, but was waylaid by his wounds. Alexander straightened. Bring him to the interrogation chamber. I will question him personally. My king, Victoria cautioned, he may still be dangerous. That's why you, Magnus, and two of your best guards will accompany me, Alexander replied. He turned to the remaining council members. This meeting will reconvene tomorrow at the dawn. In the meantime, I suggest you all consider where your true loyalties lie. 24 days remain until the seventh dark moon. By then, this treachery will be exposed to its roots, and justice will be served. As the council members filed out, Seraphina noticed Sebastian Steele lingering, his expression troubled. When they were alone, save for Alexander, Victoria, and Magnus, he approached, his usual arrogance subdued. Your Majesty, he said formally, I wish to speak plainly. Whatever you may suspect, the Ironwood Pack is loyal to the Blackthorn throne. My son's rejection of the princess was indeed poorly timed, but had nothing to do with any conspiracy. Alexander studied him, weighing his words. You deny any knowledge of Princess Seraphina's true heritage? Of her connection to the lunar prophecy? Sebastian hesitated, and in that moment, Seraphina saw the calculation behind his eyes. I had suspicions, he admitted finally. Elena Morgan appeared in our territory 25 years ago, a skilled healer with a newborn child seeking sanctuary. Her resemblance to the Blackthorn line was subtle, but present to those who knew what to look for. You knew, Seraphina said, finding her voice. All these years, you knew who I was. I suspected, Sebastian corrected, and I protected you. Why do you think no harm came to you in Ironwood territory, despite your apparent low status? Why your mother was given freedom to raise you as she wished, without interference? Out of the goodness of your heart? Victoria asked skeptically. Sebastian's expression hardened. Out of loyalty to the Blackthorn line, the Ironwood Pack has always been a staunch ally, despite disagreements over the years. Yet your son rejected Princess Seraphina, Alexander pointed out. Hardly the action of a loyal ally if you suspected her heritage. My son acted without my knowledge or consent, Sebastian said firmly. When I learned what he had done, I was displeased. But by then she had already left our territory. Seraphina studied the man who had effectively been her pack leader for most of her life, trying to reconcile this version of events with what she had experienced. Could Sebastian be telling the truth? Had he actually been protecting her all these years? If you are sincere, Alexander said after a long moment, prove it. Help us uncover the full extent of this conspiracy. Lady Isolde and Lord Thaddeus may have been the executors of Prince Evander's murder and the attempt on my life, but I doubt they acted alone. Someone has been orchestrating events from the shadows for 25 years. Sebastian inclined his head. I serve the United Pax, Your Majesty. My resources are at your disposal. We'll see, Alexander replied, not quite accepting Sebastian's offer, but not rejecting it either. You may go, but know that your actions in the coming days will be closely watched. After Sebastian had departed, Alexander turned to Serafina. What do you think? Was he telling the truth? Serafina considered the question carefully. Not entirely. He knew more than he admitted about who I was, but I'm not convinced he's directly involved in the assassination plots. His ambition has always been to increase the Ironwood Pact's influence through political means, not violence. And his son's rejection of you? That remains unexplained, Serafina acknowledged. If Sebastian truly suspected my heritage and was protecting me, why allow Griffin to court me only to reject me? It makes no sense. Unless Griffin acted independently, as Sebastian claims, Victoria suggested. We'll get answers, Alexander promised, starting with Lord Thaddeus. He turned to Magnus. Prepare the interrogation chamber. I want him ready to talk when we arrive. And me? Serafina asked. What would you have me do? Alexander's expression softened slightly as he looked at her. That is your choice, Princess. This is your father's murder we're investigating. You have every right to be present for the interrogation if you wish. The consideration in his voice touched Serafina deeply. Where Griffin had always made decisions for her, assuming his alpha status gave him that right, Alexander consistently respected her agency despite his higher rank. I'll come, she decided. I need to hear the truth from Lord Thaddeus himself. The interrogation chamber was deep within Blackcrest's lower levels, a stark room of stone and iron with a single table and chairs at its center. Lord Thaddeus sat on one side, his hands manacled to the table, a bandage visible at his shoulder where Victoria had wounded him during their escape. His ice-blue eyes, once so cold and proud, now darted nervously around the chamber as Alexander, Serafina, Victoria, and Magnus entered. Lord Thaddeus Frost, Alexander's voice echoed in the stone chamber. You stand accused of high treason against the crown, conspiracy to commit regicide, and complicity in the murder of Prince Evander Blackthorn. These are crimes punishable by death under the laws of the United Pax. Thaddeus's jaw tightened, but he remained silent. However, Alexander continued, a full confession, including the names of all your co-conspirators and the extent of your plot, may be considered in mitigation when sentence is passed. You offer mercy? Thaddeus asked, his northern accent more pronounced under stress. I offer justice, Alexander corrected. The depth of that justice depends on your cooperation. Thaddeus's gaze shifted to Serafina, lingering on the medallion at her throat and the signet ring on her hand. So it's true, he said softly. Evander's daughter lives. We thought you lost with your mother. You mean you hoped I was lost? Serafina countered, stepping closer to the table. You and Lady Isolde murdered my father before I was even born. Wait, well, what had he done to deserve such betrayal? A bitter laugh escaped Thaddeus. Done? He had done nothing. It was what he represented, the continuation of Blackthorn rule, the perpetuation of the old order that kept the Northern Pact subservient. So this was about Northern independence? Victoria asked skeptically. It began that way, Thaddeus admitted. My father saw in Prince Evander a potential ally, someone who might support greater autonomy for the outer territories. He cultivated a friendship with the prince, earned his trust, but then Evander met Elena Morgan, and everything changed. My mother, Serafina said. What did she have to do with it? She was unexpected, Thaddeus replied, his voice taking on a distant quality, as if recalling events long past. A royal guard with unusual insight who recognized the opportunity my father presented. She warned Evander not to trust him, and the prince, lovesick fool that he was, listened to her. So your father arranged Evander's death because he wouldn't support Northern independence, Magnus pressed. Thaddeus's expression darkened. It was more complicated than that. By then others had joined our cause, Lady Isolde chief among them, though for her own reasons. She had loved Evander from afar for years, only to watch him choose a common guard over her. Her wounded pride made her a perfect ally. And the lunar prophecy? Alexander asked. Where does that fit into your conspiracy? Thaddeus tensed, then seemed to realize that further deception was pointless. We learned of it from the ancient texts in Isolde's family archives. The prediction that the seventh king would face a darkness rising, that only his true mate of royal blood raised in shadow could save him. When Elena became pregnant, Isolde realized that this child, you, he nodded to Serafina, might be that mate. The timing aligned too perfectly with the prophecy. So you murdered my father and tried to eliminate me before I was born, Serafina concluded, her voice steady despite the horror of what she was hearing. Isolde wanted you both dead, Thaddeus confirmed, but your mother escaped before the plan could be completed. We searched for years, but she had hidden herself too well. Until Griffin Steele began courting me, Serafina said, the pieces falling into place. Somehow you discovered who I was. Thaddeus nodded. Isolde has ways, old magic, scrying spells. She sensed the awakening of your power as you came of age. We couldn't be certain you were Evander's daughter, but the possibility was too great to ignore. So we arranged your rejection, to break your spirit and send you fleeing into the wilderness, away from pack protection. And you arranged the ambush against me on the same day, Alexander added, his voice dangerously quiet. A coordinated attack to eliminate both of us before the prophecy could be fulfilled. Yes, Thaddeus admitted. But we underestimated fate. Instead of dying alone in the blizzard, the princess found you in the sacred cave, the very place where her father's remains lay hidden. The prophecy was advancing, despite our efforts to prevent it. Who else is involved? Magnus demanded. Sebastian Steele, his son? Thaddeus hesitated, weighing his options. Sebastian knew of our suspicions about the princess's identity, he said finally, but he was not part of the assassination plots. His ambitions run toward political alliance, not regicide. As for his son, a grim smile twisted Thaddeus's lips. Griffin Steele was a pawn, manipulated by Isolde's magic to court the princess, then reject her at the precise moment we needed her, vulnerable and alone. Serafina felt a complex wave of emotions at this revelation. Griffin had been manipulated, his actions not entirely his own. Yet she couldn't forget the coldness in his eyes during the rejection ceremony, the cruel words that had cut to her soul. And the seventh dark moon, Alexander pressed, what do you plan? That I will not tell you, Thaddeus replied, straightening in his chair despite his manacles. Isolde remains free. The plan advances. In 24 days, the darkness will rise, and the Blackthorn line will end forever. His certainty sent a chill through Serafina. Whatever Thaddeus and Isolde had set in motion, it was bigger than just the two of them. A conspiracy decades in the making, moving inexorably toward its culmination at the seventh dark moon. Take him to the secure cells, Alexander ordered the guards. Double the watch. No one speaks with him without my direct authorization. As Thaddeus was led away, Serafina turned to Alexander. We still don't know everything. Isolde is still out there, and whatever they've planned for the dark moon ceremony is still advancing. But we know more than we did, Alexander pointed out. We know Isolde is the primary threat. We know Sebastian Steele may not be directly involved in the assassination plots. And we know Griffin's rejection of you was influenced by magic. That last point stirred complex emotions in Serafina. Does that absolve him? If he was under a spell, magic can influence but rarely control completely, Victoria observed. The rejection ceremony requires words spoken with intent. Griffin chose those words, whatever influence Isolde may have exerted. The thought brought little comfort to Serafina. Even if Griffin had been manipulated, the public rejection had still occurred, had still driven her into the wilderness in despair. Yet without that journey, she would never have found Alexander in the sacred cave, never discovered her true heritage, never begun to explore the mate bond forming between them. What now? She asked, pushing thoughts of Griffin aside to focus on the more immediate threat. Now, Alexander said decisively, we prepare for Prince Evander's funeral. We honor your father and publicly acknowledge you as his daughter and rightful princess of the realm. We make it clear to all, allies and enemies alike, that the Blackthorn line remains strong. And Lady Isolde? Magnus asked. Every available tracker will search for her, Alexander replied. She cannot have gone far in such a short time. Meanwhile, we strengthen Black Crest's defenses and prepare for whatever she has planned for the seventh dark moon. As they left the interrogation chamber, Serafina felt the weight of all she had learned pressing down upon her. Her father murdered before she was born, her mother fleeing to protect her unborn child, her rejection by Griffin, engineered by a conspiracy 25 years in the making, and at the center of it all, the lunar prophecy that bound her fate to Alexander's. That night, Serafina stood on the balcony of her chambers, gazing at the stars scattered across the velvet sky. The crescent moon hung low on the horizon, a reminder that time was passing, bringing the seventh dark moon ever closer. In 24 days, according to the prophecy and Lord Thaddeus's ominous words, darkness would rise, and the fate of the Blackthorn line of Alexander would be decided. Vitit would have. A soft knock at her door drew her from her thoughts. It was Victoria, her usual armor replaced by a simpler tunic and leggings. "May I join you?" she asked, stepping onto the balcony. Without waiting for an answer, she continued, "Your mother used to stand just like that, looking at the stars when troubled. Elena always said the answers were written in the night sky, if only we knew how to read them." "I wish I had known her better," Serafina said softly. "There's so much I never understood about her. Why she kept my heritage secret. Why she chose to raise me as an Omega when royal blood flowed in my veins." "To protect you," Victoria replied simply. "Elena knew that if your true identity were discovered, you would become a target, just as your father had been. By raising you as an Omega, teaching you to be quiet and unassuming, she kept you beneath notice. She taught me healing songs," Serafina recalled, "ancient melodies in the old tongue. I didn't realize then that she was preparing me, in her way, for my heritage." Victoria smiled sadly. Elena was always planning 3 steps ahead. She knew the prophecy, knew what you might someday face. She gave you the tools you would need in a form that wouldn't draw attention. "And now I face the fulfillment of that prophecy in 24 days, Serafina said, her gaze returning to the moon. "With a woman I barely know hunting me, a mate bond forming with the king I met less than a week ago, and the fate of the United Pax apparently hanging in the balance." "You're not alone," Victoria reminded her gently. "Alexander is a good man and a strong king. Magnus and I would die to protect both of you, and you have your mother's strength in you. I see it every time you stand your ground in council or face a new revelation with courage." The older woman's confidence warmed Serafina. "Thank you," she said simply, "for believing in me when I'm still learning to believe in myself." After Victoria had gone, Serafina remained on the balcony, her thoughts turning to Alexander. The mate bond between them was growing stronger each day, undeniable despite its unexpected nature. She had felt it most powerfully in the sacred cave, when her healing magic had flowed into him, driven by something deeper than mere duty or compassion. Was this what the prophecy had foretold? Not just a political alliance, but a true mate bond between the 7th king and the daughter of Prince Evander? And if so, was their connection real or merely the fulfillment of an ancient prediction? Her contemplation was interrupted by another knock, softer than Victoria's had been. When she opened the door, Alexander himself stood there, his formal attire replaced by a simple shirt and trousers that somehow made him seem more approachable, more human, despite the natural authority he carried. "Forgive the late hour," he said. "I couldn't sleep and thought you might be equally restless after today's revelations." "Please, come in," Serafina invited, suddenly very aware of the informality of her own attire, a simple nightgown with a shawl hastily drawn around her shoulders. Alexander entered, his gaze taking in the moonlit balcony where she had been standing. "Seeking answers in the stars?" he asked with a small smile. "Victoria mentioned your mother believed in celestial guidance." "I'm not sure what I'm seeking," Serafina admitted. "Understanding, perhaps, of everything that's happened, of what's still to come." Alexander moved to the balcony, looking out at the same view that had captivated her earlier. 24 days, he said quietly, until the 7th dark moon, until the prophecy reaches its culmination. "Are you afraid?" The question slipped out before Serafina could reconsider it. Alexander was silent for a long moment. "Not of death," he said finally. "I've faced that possibility since taking the throne, but I fear failing my people, leaving the United Pax vulnerable to whatever darkness Isolde and her conspirators have planned." The honesty of his answer touched Serafina deeply. This powerful Alpha King, admitting fear not for himself but for those he was sworn to protect. "And the mate bond?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you fear that as well?" Alexander turned to her, his amber gold eyes reflecting the moonlight. "Not fear," he corrected gently, "but I approach it with caution. A true mate bond should form naturally through choice and compatibility, not because an ancient prophecy decreed it must be so." "Yet you feel it too," Serafina said, not quite a question. "I do," he acknowledged. "From the moment you found me in the cave, something resonated between us. The blood ritual strengthened it. Your healing magic in the sacred cave today deepened it further." He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "But I would not have it forced by prophecy or political necessity. I would have it be real, Serafina. a true choice, freely made by both of us. The use of her name without title sent a shiver through her. In the days since arriving at Black Crest, she had been Princess or Your Highness to everyone except Victoria. Hearing her name on Alexander's lips felt intimate in a way titles never could. I don't know what's real anymore, she confessed. So much of my life has been shaped by others' plans and machinations. Even Griffin's rejection was orchestrated by Isolde's magic. How can I trust any feeling, even one as powerful as this? Alexander's expression softened with understanding. By giving it time, he said simply. The seventh dark moon approaches, yes, but we need not make every decision by that deadline. We will face the threat together, as king and princess, as possible mates, as allies against whatever darkness rises. And afterward, if we both survive, we can explore what lies between us without the pressure of prophecy hanging over our heads. The wisdom and patience in his words soothed something in Serafina that had been raw and uncertain since her rejection. Alexander was offering her time, space, and most importantly, choice, things Griffin had never truly given. Thank you, she said softly, for understanding, for not pressing for what prophecy may demand. Alexander smiled, the expression transforming his usually serious features into something truly captivating. The prophecy speaks of my true mate, he reminded her, not a reluctant partner pressured by circumstances. Whatever bond forms between us, I would have it be genuine. As he turned to leave, Serafina felt a sudden certainty that transcended all the doubt and confusion of recent days. She reached out, her hand catching his arm. Whatever happens in the days to come, she said, meeting his gaze steadily, know that what I feel for you is real. Not prophecy, not politics, not magic, just real. The surprise in Alexander's eyes gave way to something warmer, deeper. He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. Until tomorrow, princess, he said softly, then departed, leaving Serafina with the lingering warmth of his touch and the certainty that whatever fate awaited them at the seventh dark moon, they would face it together. Outside her chambers, the crescent moon continued its arc across the night sky, 24 days from the darkness that would test them all. But for the first time since her rejection, since discovering her royal heritage, since learning of the prophecy that bound her to Alexander, Serafina felt something like peace settle within her heart. Whatever darkness rose at the seventh dark moon, she would meet it not as the rejected Omega she had been, but as Princess Serafina Blackthorn, daughter of Prince Evander, healer, and perhaps, if they both chose it freely, true mate to the seventh king of the United Pax.